This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast, Week 12, NFL picks. I almost double clutched there as I was reading Week 12, and I was like, wait, is it really Week 12? But it is Week 12. I don't have to double clutch on this because my name is still Sheldon Alexander, and I'm still joined by my guy, Mr. Matt Russell. And you know what? I'm still fighting off the football elements of this football season. And what I mean by that is when you're talking about gambling, you're talking about making bets, you're talking about spreads, you can do a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, football happens.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that I got footballed last week. We will get to that for sure. But first, the particulars, because I always start with the housekeeping numbers off the front end, right? Last week, a 6-7-1 record, bringing the season total to 81, 79, and 4. Now, 6-7-1, okay? I'm saying that number because there's a game that I want to talk about right off the front end. First off, there was a push involved there, which was a game that I'm forgetting right now off the top of my head, but we'll get there. But the Bengals, okay? Before we get anywhere, I'm sorry. I'm a minute and a half in, and I haven't even let you say anything yet because I'm fired up.
Hi. Turkey week.
We're coming in hot right now. Hot right now. It's Thanksgiving week. There's football everywhere. There's football on a Friday. There's 3 games on Thursday. I am hyped to start this pod. You know what? I'm going to say hello to you because I'm going to be polite. How are you, Mr.
Listen,
Matt Russell?
I'm great, buddy. I'm great. Listen, it's like you said, man, it's Thanksgiving week. It's the best. We got to get it's like, let's get into the games because like we got people flying across country out here. They're probably in an airport for like 4 hours waiting for delayed flights. Like, I mean, we got a full slate of games here. We might take 4 hours. So, we might be helping the folks out who need something to listen to. But, we got a game, at the time we're taping this podcast, we got a game in less than 24 hours, man.
It's true.
This is big time. And you just mentioned you're 6-7-1 last week. I have 8-6-1 written down for myself. Now, not all of those are necessarily bets.
Yeah.
Am I counting an extra game here? Like you've thrown me for a loop.
Oh, maybe I can't count. Maybe
I might be the one who can't. How many teams are on bye? Were 4 teams on bye last week or 2 teams on bye? Anyway, none of that is important. I can do my own accounting at a later date. I'm just saying like that's how rattled I am where I'm like, is it not 8-6-1? Because again, it not that really matters because let's be honest, there was a lot of bets that were made on wins and losses, but not necessarily 13 or 14 or however many 15. Apparently, there were 15 games, according to my number down here. So I was hoping you were over 500, but I think you got jammed up on that Thursday night game. I think a lot of people got jammed up on Thursday night. You got a beef with the Cincinnati.
I have a beef with the Bengals because here's my question here. How is it that the game starts and then magically after he's out, all this footage then comes out of him with the brace on? That's where I'm kind of like, somebody had to know something somewhere to which like, this isn't just breaking news in the middle of the game. Oh yeah, here's him wearing an arm sleeve coming off the bus. Like, no, somebody knew about that ahead of time. And I don't understand how that can happen now when there's literally billions of dollars being placed on this game and the availability of Joe Burrow kind of has a big deal. Like, that's a big deal, right? That's a massive deal. And so you look at that line, and the first thing was not everyone, but I'm assuming there's a lot of people on the Bengals because you're looking at that line and you're saying, okay, Bengals getting points. Like, this is big. Let's go. And then you see that and it's like, oh, well, maybe that's why they were getting points. That just reeks of fishiness to me. But also, I will admit my sour grapes. And I try to represent the common Joe, that's like, what the hell? The world's against me. But is there legit beef here with how that went down?
Yeah, of course there is. I think I'm usually pretty on top of, this sort of thing but like how deep into the dark web did we have to go to get that picture? Like it just kind of like popped up out of nowhere. And I don't know if we would have done anything, especially since the last sort of star quarterback injury issue on a Thursday night was that Trevor Lawrence situation from the Jags and Saints game from maybe, month and a half ago. And it was like, oh man, his leg is going to be a problem. And then like he literally had the most rushing yards he had all season in that game. He was just Bambi like good Bambi, not slipping on ice Bambi, just like just running like a deer through the Saints secondary. And you're sitting there going like, it's the type of information I could have used earlier. And it's the same thing with Burrow. But for me, I want to give a shout out to Joe Burrow because like on the surface and in reality, like I lost a lot of money when Joe Burrow got hurt. Like we talked about the idea of like betting him to win the MVP. We've talked about the idea of the Bengals at like a plus 400 price, maybe if they win this game, for the division. And of course the bet that we made at plus 3.5. And we'll never know whether that was a good bet or not. But what I can tell you, all I can tell you is that they were up 10-7 when he left that game. And so, a lot of, let's say, weaker men might have left that game immediately upon getting sort of hurt, aggravation of an injury or whatever, and not had his last pass of the season be a touchdown pass to put them up 10-7. And then being the emotive fellow that he is on the sideline, he wasn't in the tent. I mean, I guess he was in the tent at one point, but like he's out there, he's trying to throw the ball, and it was just clear. He's like, nope, no go. Like this is not going to work. And it's like, I'll put it in like sort of I don't know if it's the gentlest way possible, but the most, sort of easiest way possible I can put it. Like, if you aren't trained at that point to immediately go to every sports book you can get your hands on and make a live bet to get out of that position, especially since they're up 10-7. Yeah. And there were moments where the Ravens were still underdogs in live betting, but they were for a while there. And when I say a while, I mean like 5 to 10 minutes, like minus 110, minus 120, minus 125 on the money line. And then obviously, everything sort of follows suit where it's like, well, Burrow's not coming back. And that's when it got out to like the 8.5, 10.5, 14.5 at halftime. But like there was plenty of time to get out of that bet. I was getting out of every bet that I could. Right? I'm like, I'm just shoveling money into like, it's like that, the meme was shoveling coal into the fire. I'm shoveling money in because I'm like, okay, got to get out of plus 3.5. What else do we got to get out of? Burrow MVP. Let's throw some Ravens money that way. A division, bet that we made to sort of semi-hedge off of the Ravens bet from before the season. Okay, there's more money into the fireplace. In this case, the fireplace is, returned the easiest money that you could ever make, right, on the Ravens money line, ending up winning that. So, we talked last week about the idea of a push being this sort of nebulous thing, but like making money off of a push based on real life betting. Like it's one thing to come on the show and talk about picks and having something just be that one at the end of the record. In this case, right, like that's going to be an L on the record. But guess who like made back a lot of money on that because you're watching the game. And like shout out to Joe Burrow for making just purely obvious that my guy was done, not just for that game, but it was, honestly, it looked like he was going to miss some significant time. And then of course, the next day we find out significant time is the rest of the season. So, a lot of guys would have played it a lot cooler than Joe Burrow, even though of course his nickname is Joe Cool. But shout out to him for sort of going out on his sword, right? Quote unquote, dying a hero, if you will. So, can't argue too much with the like misfortune of that situation because it's football. And like you said, you're going to get footballed sometimes. Sometimes it's like a mystery injury, but at least the mystery was removed very soon after Burrow came out of that game.
And I want to back you up here totally on what you're saying. And when you add in the character of Joe Burrow, even how the season started, and he was trying to play through injuries as well, like that's a tough MFer right there, right? That like, at least this isn't about him being soft or anything about that. So to your point, right when you see him like that on the sideline, okay, it's a wrap, it's over. But you mentioned the speed to like get things done here in terms of live betting. I was in commute. I was at home. I was at work. I was at the office. And before I left, I'm like, hold on, let me make sure I get my final stuff in. Okay. Bing, bang, boom. All right. On my way home. And I turned on the TV, turned up the laptop. And the first thing I saw before because the game was in commercial, I saw your tweet. And that was like live betting. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something about immediately live betting the Ravens right now. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what's going on here? And I looked down at the timestamp and it was like 5 minutes ago. Right. And I'm like, damn it, I missed it. Because that's how quick
Yeah.
That's how quick things are changing and moving, right? But I'm trying to figure out what's happening. I'm trying to figure out, like, I knew nothing. Then they came up from commercial break and I'm seeing Burrow. I'm like, what the?
Yeah.
It was hilarious. But to your point.
And it's worth mentioning too, right? Like sorry everybody, like guess what has to happen before I send that tweet?
You make the bet.
I gotta go make them bets,
of course.
right?
Of course.
But it's like I'm going to get the tweet out just in case. That's what I mean by training people.
Yeah.
Listen to this podcast to like know that like you do not have to cling to your ticket for dear life. There are going to be plenty of situations where like bad stuff happens in a game where you're like, all right, my bet's just going to lose. And honestly, that's okay. There's going to be 1,000 bets. We're going to lose a bunch of them, right? But the idea of like being able to get out of this one where it was like, yeah, I signed up for Joe Burrow. All of those like trend statistics of like underdog and blah, 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 blah. It's like, those are all attached to Joe Burrow. They are not attached to the Bengals as a franchise. They are not attached to Zach Taylor. They're not even attached to Jamar Chase, right? They are all attached to Joe Burrow. And if he gets removed from the game, that is like the fundamental handicap of the game. But like the good news is the books are sitting there going, what do we do? Right? Like he could come back.
There's some time where they're figuring out what's going on.
Yeah. So they're like, we can't make the Ravens a 7.5 point favorite when the Bengals have a 3-point lead. And there was also, and I said shout out to Joe Burrow, but like shout out to the referee who made that absurd holding call that took back a Ravens touchdown because that bought everybody just that little bit more time to get like a decent price on the Ravens. And then they immediately scored like, I think a couple of plays later, right? Like, so there was even that extra little bit of time where you're sitting there going like, I'm every sports book I can get my hands on, right? I'm like log in, like, Face ID. I'm like staring at my phone. Yeah. And so like, but the problem is like, I can't be telling everybody when like take that bet. Like I'm busy trying to like get as much down as I possibly can without getting like booted from various sports books, which, is already enough of a problem in my life that, like, and so it's like, yeah, okay. There's still, when I said that tweet, it's like, there's still time. Sorry, you're not going to get the best of the number, but like they ended up winning by 14. Like you probably won if you bet at basically any point for the next like half an hour. So, yeah,
I was just relaying the reality TV side of what happened. Right? Yeah. Like that's what I was relaying. The real time, like, wait, what's happening? Wait, we're betting. We're on the Ravens. Wait, hold on. Where's Joe Burrow? Yeah. Wait, who's Jake Browning? Damn it, I have Jamar Chase in fantasy. All these emotions just like rifling through at the same time. And it's why we love the NFL. And it's why we love weeks like this. As mentioned, Thanksgiving week. For the record, 4 teams were on bye last week.
Okay.
Right. So for the
14 games. So I have added an extra game. I don't know why.
I hope you added a win. I'll just say that.
No, I hope I added a loss, right? I wanted to be 8-5 and 1.
Oh, yes, you're right. You're right. Sorry.
Listen, I know how much money I made last week. Like that's important.
I want to, and we don't do this. We don't do this part enough, but I'm going to pat you on the back here because talking about records to bets, like the bets that were made in terms of being heavy on the Raiders, heavy on the Cowboys, heavy on the Texans, even though they made that a little close, but that's the beauty of making sure when you get your number and the earlier that you're in on that, because that went to like 5.5
to 6
game time. Yeah. Right. So, that's the stuff we're talking about here. And that's why this stuff is all important. And that's why, you know what? I'm going to get to the games this week because people are waiting.
Yeah. They're starting in like 5 minutes, depending on when you're listening to this. Like, it's like the game actually ended 3 hours ago. All right, guys.
But thanks, guys.
The one week we should have been like, hey, in the first 30 seconds, let's break down Lions and Packers. We go off on a tangent. Sorry, everybody.
Apologies, but we'll get to it.
Timestamps. So they're timestamps, right? If you're
there's timestamps in there. You can scroll ahead, skip ahead of me complaining about Joe Burrow's injury and crying that my fantasy team also sucks.
That's right.
All right, let's go. Thanksgiving, first game. We got the Packers at the Lions. Lions at home and favored by 7.5 points. I still don't like the Packers, but 7.5 feels to me like the number where I should be leaning that way. Those are the rules I'm going to say, but I don't really like it. And I mean, I could be talked out of it very easily. Not into the Lions, because the thing is, the Lions already beat the Packers. I understand that in Green Bay pretty easily. Yeah. Like, should I be on the Lions here? Is this just a matter of wait, it's Thanksgiving. And I don't know if I'm used to laying this many points with the Lions on Thanksgiving, right? Like, is this the world we're living in now? Should I be switching this lean from Green Bay plus 7.5 and just, rolling with the Lions rolling? Is that a thing? Is this life?
Yeah, I think it is, man. And it's funny, you and I, you off air, we talked about last year's Thursday and like, some World Cup stories and blah, blah, blah off air. And, I think about that game last year, and I had the Lions, and I had the Lions money line, and it was against the Bills. Yes. And it's so funny to think that like the Lions money line was like this crazy, like you crazy for going, taking the Lions on the money line against the Bills. And they end up losing a very close game. I think I'm sure they covered the spread, but didn't get the money line. Didn't get there.
Oh, they did cover.
Yeah. And so, but it's so funny, like a year later, and like, that's kind of the point with betting, right? Like you want to be, if you can be too early, I guess you'd rather be too early than too late. And I don't know how that sort of, I think the strange part here is that everybody's having kind of a problem with the idea that the Lions are favored on Thanksgiving and favored significantly, because the quote unquote square play that like has always come in is just fade the Lions on Thanksgiving. And like, we're just now in this world where it's like, no, man, like I really like the Lions this week. And I think if there was reason to like not like the Lions, this line would be 7. It would have stayed 7 when it was 7 earlier this week. And speaking of that cash gift from the tweet last week, I put another bunch of money in a box and sent it back in on the Lions again this week. I realize it can be a little bit scary because you look at it last week and you're like, man, the Lions like should have maybe lost to the Bears, right? I mean, they had to come out, have that crazy comeback. But like you look at the turnover margin in that game, it was 4-1 for the Bears. Yeah. And the Lions still won that game, right? Like that's not a game that most teams sort of win, right? And so are they going to get, there's going to be a bunch of turnovers against this Packers team? Like, I don't really think so. We were on the Packers last week. We're on the Packers +3. We're on the Packers on the money line. We're like way deep into the Packers. I watched every second of that game. And some of them were just cold drops. And then other times, like Justin Herbert's whipping it at Keenan Allen, and Keenan Allen, you can tell he's staring directly into the sun.
Yeah.
And he
off the chest plate.
And it's just like right off the chest. And it's like, yeah, because like his retinas are burnt out because he's staring directly in the sun. And so like you can, point fingers obviously at Quentin Johnson and all that sort of thing, right? But like, I just remember watching that game, or my takeaway from that game. And I think, listen, it's a takeaway all the time. But like when you're watching these games, think about where you're at about these teams in the third quarter. And there will be other examples of this, and like how you feel about it. And like, I was like, man, this Packers team stinks. And Aaron Jones gets hurt, and luckily it's not an ACL. It looks like an MCL. He's probably not in this game. Luke Musgrave is out. I don't know necessarily how good Musgrave is, how irreplaceable he is necessarily, but like the Packers scoring always kind of seems like a fluke, like a breakdown in coverage. Like they're really good at throwing the ball kind of medium to deep. They're not really good at kind of anything else. AJ Dillon, like I had AJ Dillon over props, over 29.5. And like it couldn't have set up better for him. And he ran for exactly 29 yards because like half his carries went backwards. You're like, man, if you can't do it on your own here with 2 different running backs getting hurt for the Packers in that game, when can you get it done? And I'm watching the defense, and the defense seems lethargic, and the Chargers could have easily, listen, they chargered this game away. They could have easily had, 4 more points on drives that turned in from touchdowns to field goals. I think 3 times, like to be pretty conservative about it. So, I mean, that's 12 points right there. And it's just like, this Packers team who, you mentioned obviously that game against Detroit the first time around in Lambeau, where like at halftime, it was like turn the TV off type stuff, right? Like the Lions were killing them on both sides of the ball. And I don't really know what's changed, because we didn't sit in here like waiting for the Packers to like come, do something. And they've had a nice little run because they've gone up against the Rams, the Steelers. I mean, they lost that game, but at least the offense looked okay. But like we've talked about how the Steelers pass defense has some pretty significant holes in it. And then the crappy Chargers defense and offense that wasn't clicking because of the sun, apparently. And it's just like, man, I just think they're going into Detroit here and like probably just going to get smoked. I don't have confidence in LaFleur. I don't have confidence in Jordan Love at this point. And like part of the whole reason the Bears got that lead against the Lions, it's like they unleashed Justin Fields. We got Justin Fields back in our lives. 18 carries, something
which
like
you
that.
talked about last week on the pod, right? Like you talked
Yeah.
about the fact that Justin Fields coming back, it's a whole other element of, you know, the Bears offense, and what they've showed with Bajent in there was at least that like, okay, they can like move the ball around. So now if you do that with Fields and another weapon, you literally said, and I'm like bigging you up here pretty hard here.
I know.
I'll accept the check later on.
I was going to say e-transfer coming.
No. But you literally said last week, you were like, Bajent was able to scramble and get like, you know, 6-7 yards here and there. What if you turn those scrambles into Justin Fields scrambles? That was a thing that was
that was pretty verbatim, man. Yeah.
My point overall is the people listening to this pod, the real ones know, right? Yeah. The people that listen to the pod know. And I hope that you understand as well, just like, you know, even that process here, the picks changed to the Detroit Lions. And how I phrased this was, I know that I probably should be on the Lions, but I need to be talked into this more because just that acceptance of what we're used to here, right? And there's rules and principles. And it's like, here's my starting point. I need to be talked out of it. Yeah. But like that process is what's helped me improve so much in seeing gambling results over the last few years in terms of bets and making money. So I hope that everyone and the longtime listeners appreciate that fact and understand sort of the process, what we go through, other than like me just posting on a screen, like, here's my picks for the game.
Yeah. And worth mentioning, right? Like all of that conversation was part of the idea that I'm like, yeah, I already bet the Bears. I already bet the Bears plus 10.5, and the line has come down, you know, had come down. And at 7.5, I was like, okay, I'm like, I've got my 10.5 in place, but like, let's tease the Lions, and the Lions coming back and salvaging that teaser leg. And so we end up kind of middling that. So understanding that, like, I won a bet fading the Lions 4 days ago. I won a bet backing the Packers 4 days ago, and being able to come in and looking at both of those teams and being like, I don't know that, listen, I don't think I got lucky fading the Lions because again, the Bears brought all that to the table. And you know, listen, spoiler alert, we're going to be on them on Monday night. It's more just like, I, you know, when I'm watching these games, like, how do I feel about these things? Right. I'm like, do I feel like I kind of got lucky with the Packers win? I'm like, yeah, a little bit. You know, because dudes are getting hit in the chest with Justin Herbert fastballs. And, you know what I mean? And so it's like, yeah, guess what? I'm going to be teasing the bleep out of the Lions again this week. Like, we were back on that. And for anybody who's reads my stuff over at the Score, like, we got a teaser leg already home on Monday night that closed the Lions teaser. We had a Lions Eagles sort of sandwich going with Lions teaser leg, Eagles teaser leg that cashed. And now we have Eagles teaser leg going into Lions teaser leg tomorrow. So we got a lot of legs going on, turkey legs at this point, teaser/turkey legs. So I'm doing both, man. I'm in the teaser. I'm in the minus 7.5. It's all about the Lions.
Love it. And yes, the pick has been changed again for our audio listeners here. Pick has been changed. Lions minus 7.5 on Thanksgiving. But let's keep the Thanksgiving times cooking here with kind of a similar scenario in terms of, okay, I know that this number being at 12.5, Cowboys at home, favored by 12.5 against the Commanders. I'm going to start with, okay, Commanders by 12.5 plus 12.5, divisional game. You know, they kind of play tough here and there sometimes, but here's my question for you. How bad are the Commanders? Do they fall into the crappy category of teams that the Cowboys beat up on, i.e. the Jets twice, or the Jets, the Giants twice, the Cards, the Rams, the Pats, etc.? You know, like, that's my question. And it goes into what you talk about all the time in terms of your rankings and where you see all these teams, because the Cowboys take care of business against shitty teams. It's just, are the Commanders that shitty, I guess, is the question.
The funny thing is, right, and that's, the Commanders are this fun team because you don't know what version you're going to get, because the version that turns the ball over a billion times is going to be the version that loses, as we predicted they might, as 9.5, you know, as plus 320 money line opponents, you know, with the Giants last week. Or they're the team that if they don't turn the ball over, it's like going down to the wire in Seattle. It's going down to the wire essentially twice with the Eagles. And if you can be in the mix with those two teams, like you have a ceiling, you have a higher ceiling than most of these teams. We talk about, the range for a lot of these teams. But any team that turns the ball over 6 times is probably going to play to the absolute bottom of their range, and all of a sudden makes them vulnerable to literally any team. And as we have, decided last week, the Giants are certainly any team, right? They are that any team.
Yes.
So, but the problem is here is like, or the issue here is like we're getting 12.5 points. So if you told me, the Cowboys going to Deron Bland is going to be, jumping routes, and Micah Parsons is going to be, strip sacking the Commanders all live long day, I'll be like, yeah, probably in a big bit of trouble here. But at least the Commanders have an offensive plan. And what I mean by that is like for the first, X amount of weeks here, let's say 7 or 8 weeks, Sam Howell's just getting sacked hand over fist, right? It was literally like 5 to 6, 7 sacks a game.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, we can't run the football, which is why we're getting sacked. We can't really block. That's why we're getting sacked. We need to sort of tighten up the passing game here. So they're still throwing the ball a ton. I think Sam Howell's like first or second or something along those lines in passing yards. They haven't had their bye week yet, so that's a little bit misleading because obviously he's played an extra game. But they've started using Brian Robinson as sort of a dump-off option here, sort of a safety valve, if you will. And his targets have basically, like, in the last 2 games, he's had the same amount of targets as he had in those first 9 games. And so at least they're doing something to stop the screw ups, or at least to kind of minimize the screw ups. Now I say that knowing full well that they turned the ball over 6 times last week.
Yeah.
So like, it's not necessarily working all the time, but at least they're doing something differently, right? And you see all these other teams, the Steelers, who finally are getting around to firing Matt Canada and doing something different. And the Jets, who, like, again, we'll talk about that game. At least they're doing something different, whether that's a good thing or bad thing, right? It's something different. And so, like, at least the Commanders are trying something different. They are, fundamentally kind of different. And the sacks are still happening. They're not happening at the same rate. So, if you're giving points with the Commanders like you were last week, it's like, no thanks. But if you're getting points up over a touchdown, up over 10, now at 12.5 at this point, I mean, is this going any further? Somebody out there likes the Cowboys, right? Because this line has gone up from 11. Actually, I think it even dipped down to 10.5. But this has gone up from 10.5 to 12.5. I don't know what this means necessarily. Cowboys have covered 1 Thanksgiving game since like I can't remember if it was 2013, as in it was 10 years, or 2010, and it's been 13 years. They've covered 1 time basically in the last like decade plus on Thanksgiving. I don't know what that has to do with this team necessarily, right? I'm not a big like, oh yeah, something that happened in 2013 matters in this game necessarily, but like, it certainly sets up like a situation where it's like, man, everybody really loves the Cowboys. I really love the Cowboys. I got Dak MVP in hand. I got CeeDee Lamb Offensive Player in the Year in hand, all that good stuff at big numbers. So I'm hoping like they have a nice big game here. But I can't rule out the fact that the Commanders can move the ball on offense. They have trusty, reliable options and have an actual idea of what they seem to be doing, with Eric Bieniemy calling the plays, and obviously, former chief necessarily. So like, yeah, I don't expect the Commanders to win this game. But like, we could get to a point, a 17-point game where Sam Howell's driving for that backdoor cover. Now, I'm not betting it like we have to have that, right? I'm not betting it like, oh man, like can't wait for them to be down 17. Like, I think the Commanders could be in this game. They just have to not turn the ball over. And if it's 4:30, 5 o'clock, and it's like, second turnover for Sam Howell, it's just gonna be like, oh god, it's gonna be a long day. So, we'll see here. I like the Commanders a lot here. I am obviously a little bit nervous that somebody out there loves this so much, but listen, I don't have the stats to back this up necessarily, but there have been a lot of situations where the line has gone the opposite direction against me, and I have done quite well sticking to my guns. So we're gonna stick to our guns on this.
I was gonna say, I found it while you were talking. The Dallas has covered just 1 spread. They've covered 1 game, which was in 2018.
Yeah.
Since 2011.
2011. Yeah. 2010 was the last time they covered prior to. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I wrote this. I wrote about it, and I've forgotten the night. Like we're so deep into it. I'm like, I wrote it. I researched it. I looked it up, wrote it down, sent it out, and totally forgot what the exact stat was. But yeah, think about that. That's a really long time for a team that in a lot of cases has been the quote unquote better team on this day. And a lot of those are outright losses, by the way. And we're not asking the Commanders to do that.
We're very familiar with the outright losses
we are,
by the Cowboys on Thanksgiving.
Speaking of, speaking of OG pod listeners and like those who know, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, we are more than familiar with the Cowboys losing on Thanksgiving. Considerably less at stake this year.
Right.
Somewhat thankfully.
I'll be into the tequilas by this point on Thanksgiving, as we will be celebrating Thanksgiving for sure. We keep it moving though. Thanksgiving talk here as we head into I was going to say Sunday night, but it's actually Thanksgiving night.
That's right.
As you haven't
even got to current time yet, as people listen to this on Friday morning.
Right. You have the Niners, 7.5-point favorites in Seattle against the Seahawks. And here's my thing here. I'll just be quick here. Niners always beat the Seahawks. The Niners, this is a bad matchup for the Seahawks all the time. But I also think the added layer here, this is a game that Shanahan's bringing out all the A++ plays because you want to put the Seahawks out. This is the chase for the Seahawks trying to keep pace in the NFC West. And if you're the Niners here, I know the 7.5, this is where you could call me out for being emotional here with this bet. But I feel like at the 7.5 on the road, not a typical place you want to be. But I feel like this is the statement game for the Niners where they always take care of business against the Seahawks. And there's a little added more juice here. If you remember last season, almost a similar situation where it was a Thursday night game, I'm pretty sure, in one of Brock Purdy's first games, if I remember correctly. Yep. And the Niners just, they won by double digits. This is just one of those, I'm the institution of Kyle Shanahan and what the Niners are versus your man's Pete Carroll in it up as we normally see. Give me the Niners. I'll lay the 7.5 points.
Yeah. Speaking of juice, you do have to pay a little bit of juice to get currently as of right now to be laying that, or I should, laying that. No, let me just back that up. I like the Seahawks in this game. To get plus 7.5, you have to pay a little bit of juice for that. So I like it at 7 at sort of like a cheaper price. I gave it out in my Thursday, Friday best bets article that went out today on Wednesday over at The Score at plus 7. Always fun when you start to see some 7.5s popping. I would be a little bit more worried if that became pervasive in the marketplace. You mentioned the game last year, and I think that's a nice jumping off point for sort of my handicapping this game. You're just a skosh off. It was an 8-point game in that game. Was not a double digits. It wasn't quite a double digits victory for your 49ers. You'll remember that Brock Purdy got out to, everybody was worried about Brock Purdy because he had played, I believe it was 3 games, and this was his first road game in sort of a sketchy environment. And I know that I'll tell you right now, I was on the Seahawks plus the points, and I think it was probably pretty similar point spread to this, maybe something along the lines of 6.5, something like that.
Okay.
And Brock Purdy comes out and he completes his first 11 passes. It was a full-on like Kyle Shanahan script, like, and I don't even know if any of them were like 5 yards down the field, right? It was dumper to Christian McCaffrey, screen to Debo, like George Kittle, like all that kind of stuff. Maybe a couple of them were decent distance. And so he comes out and he gets, he throws those first 11 completions. And then the rest of the way, I think he went like 5 of 16, something along those lines. So like once the script went away, so did the efficiency when it came to Brock Purdy. Now, again, it was his 3rd or 4th game, of the season. And obviously they were trying to protect him as best they could. 49ers were also able to run against the Seahawks. Seahawks were terrible on run defense all last year. It was like the easiest thing in the world to run against the Seahawks, to the point where when the season, immediately upon the season ending, they basically cut everyone on their defensive line and were like, we're just going to start fresh here because you guys all stink. You guys are all bad at this. And through the start of the season, the run defense has completely turned around. Now, they then went to Baltimore in a game that obviously you and I talked about, and basically gave up roughly 2.7 billion rushing yards to Baltimore, right? You had Keaton Mitchell coming in late and busting long runs. So, like, obviously all of that, whether it was just the bad game or certainly the end of that game where Mitchell had 100 and something, I think he led the league in rushing for the week that week. I think it's all a little bit sort of, fraudulent when it comes to the statistics. So my point is like they ended up, the 49ers ended up running for like, I think 170 yards. Brock Purdy was 11 for 11. and then kind of nothing else. And so have the Seahawks fixed the run defense to the point where they can, not allow 170 rushing yards this week? Like, yeah, I kind of think they have, right? Like it's obviously been sort of a focal point. And this is the first, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first matchup between these two teams this season. And then the other thing is like, okay, Brock Purdy, we were worried about him in sort of a, sketchy, road condition thing. Shanahan sort of walked him through it to a level of, certain degree of success. There was a big catch to, a big throw to George Kittle in there.
It was a massive trick play. You're right about that. It was a crazy, like, double reverse trick play, fake handoff reverse, and then dude's open. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so that we've seen this season, like, when have things gone a little bit awry for the 49ers? Those road games in sort of tougher environments, right? The Clevelands, the Minnesotas, right? Where Minnesota, Monday night, kind of crazy environment. Seattle kind of fits the bill for unusual environment, right? So like, as much as like, and we love betting on them when, at home, even that big number last week where like, that number got up to 13. And it's just like, yeah, they still managed to push everything except for the 13, or cover everything except for the 13. That was obviously a push. And I don't know that they necessarily deserved it. I mean, the Buccaneers had all kinds of backdoor opportunities. Neither here nor there. I mean, they got the lead and they got a significant lead. And that's
I got you.
Kind of the point. But like, we love it when it's like, oh, go to Jacksonville and lay only, a couple of points, or like go to, some of these sort of, not that scary places, if you will, with, obviously scary being in italics. And so I just kind of go like, what Brock Purdy are we going to get? Like, maybe it's an 11 for 11, start. Maybe the running game is cooking, but like, even with those two things, that was still only an 8-point loss. And the key play to that entire game was when Seattle, sort of got past the early like bullets that they were taking from the 49ers, like having a really good efficient offense, was Travis Homer with a critical fumble on this sort of like dump off like type situation. Now anybody can fumble theoretically, obviously, but like, even at the time it was like, Travis Homer, man, like this is where we're at, Seattle, where Travis Homer is getting the ball in the second half of this game. Like, Travis Homer, like, really? And like, the Seahawks since then have like, all they've done is add these, very interesting players. Obviously, Kenneth Walker was on the team then as a rookie. I believe he played in that game. And so even then you're like, really? Not Kenneth Walker, Travis Homer is the option. It's like they replaced the backup running back with like a pretty high draft pick in Zach Charbonnet. They've added Jake Bobo. They added obviously Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? Like, there are far more options to potentially beat the 49ers secondary, which we saw against even Tampa Bay. As much as like the 49ers did well to build up that lead, like, the 49ers secondary is still going to be the weakness. It's always going to be the weakness. It's why they overload. They spend all their money and their draft capital and whatnot on the front seven, on the defensive line. And by the way, 49ers just lost a pretty key player. Safety.
Huge. That's a huge loss. Their safety.
Yeah. Hufanga. And so it's like, I'm not asking Seattle to win necessarily, though I certainly don't rule it out.
Yeah.
But at a plus 250 plus 300 is, if this thing keeps getting, I mean, there's some plus 300s out there. It's like plus 300 means they just have to win this game 1 out of 4 times for you to break even. I kind of think they win this at least 1 out of 4 times. And now that we're up to plus 7.5, or like I said, plus 7, like I've already made a bet at plus 7. I'll probably come back and make another bet at plus 7.5. Certainly if it gets to minus 110. I just think like a lot went well for the 49ers last year against I shouldn't say far worse, but like I still feel like they were a worse team, especially on the run defense side. And they still only won by 8. And it took like I said, a fumble, bad run defense, Brock Purdy starting the game 11 for 11, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's
a tough ask for sure.
Yeah. And listen, the 49ers would be content. And listen, this comes back down and we haven't seen it as much, or maybe we have, and it just hasn't been as sort of obvious, but like, the Kyle Shanahan conservative type, plays from not plays as in like the plays that he's calling, but like 4th down decisions and like that kind of stuff that like maybe makes them more likely to win the game, but less likely to cover a big spread, especially on the road. I think that might come into, come and rear its ugly head here. And so I like the Seahawks at what I think is a pretty big price for, and listen, we should mention obviously Geno, right? Where he gets hurt in that game, but like he came back in. A couple of throws that were a little bit wobbly, right? But if Jason Myers kicks that field goal, which like
We're talking a different thing right now.
Most times he does, like, yeah, maybe we're having a different conversation. So, and by the way, like, listen, who knows, right, with Drew Lock, but like, maybe if the idea of Drew Lock kind of knowing that he might have to play in this game has maybe him a little bit more locked in and ready to go versus getting thrown into the mix in the fourth quarter of that game in LA last week. Maybe it's not a huge disaster this time around if Lock has to play, in this game. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully Geno's fine. The one thing I worry about this line kind of moving up as high as it is like maybe things haven't gone necessarily as great for Geno as we, go into this game. But again, once you hit this number, once you get over a touchdown, if we find out that Geno Smith can't play and Drew Lock is starting, I hate to say it, but like I'm now again over a touchdown. Like, I'm pretty fine with that.
No, I got you. I know I'm asking a lot from my Niners here at 7.5, but sometimes tough, difficult calls need to be made here.
You're going to be all boozed up and jacked up on turkey. You don't need to be like, oh man, 49ers, but like not by 8. You don't need to get all confused, man. Just ride your Niners and just get deep into it and just be like, hope they win by 30.
Another round, bartender. All right.
The worst thing that happens is it just ends up in the L column next week. And honestly, that's far from that penal.
Been there before.
Yeah.
Speaking of, there's a Friday game. What? Yeah, like as if we didn't enjoy Thanksgiving week enough. They add in more specials for us in terms of a Friday game. Dolphins, 9.5-point favorites on the road in New York against the Jets. Your man Zach Wilson has finally been benched. And, how bad do you have to be to get benched knowing you're going into a short week? That's a different level.
Yeah,
of like,
you're right.
You suck. Right. Anyways, This kind of gives me the vibes, though, of the Cowboys game we were just talking about in terms of a divisional game. And I have to ask the questions of how bad are the Jets here? Just like I asked, how bad are the Commanders? Because we're talking about 9.5 points. What's Tim Boyle? Is that my guy's name, or did I make up Tim?
No, you got it. Tim Boyle.
Tim Boyle.
Yeah.
It's not Dan. That guy used to play on the Leafs, right? But anyways, the Jets, my question here is Tim Boyle getting the start, 9.5 points. For him to be, tossed into this, that can't just be some reckless decision on a short week.
Sure it can. It absolutely can be reckless. It can be totally reckless because like the headline for this is, or at least the sub-headline is, if Tim Boyle was any good, he'd already have played. Because like this isn't the first day of like, hey, you know what? Zach Wilson might not be good at this. Right? Like, this isn't like news to anybody.
So 9.5 points. I'm saying my it's not at 10. But the 9.5, I'm still like leaning. I'm like, shouldn't I be on the Jets here? Like short week, 9.5. Talk me out of it. I need to be talked out of this because it's like,
okay. So let's start here. All you need to know about Tim Boyle, right? And like, there's a lot of scenarios we talk about all the time, right? Where like bad quarterback gets benched and it's like, did it move the point spread? And you're like, no, not really. Right. And like, we played the whole like Deshaun Watson, how much is he worth to the point spread type game. And like the answer,
by the way.
Right. And the answer to that is like, God, probably not that much. Right. And that guy's making $280 gajillion. And so for this, when you look, go Zach Wilson's, coming out and it's like, oh, okay. So the line dropping. No. It's like, has the line moved? Yes. You're like, up? You're like, yeah, because this is 7.5. And then they're like, Zach Wilson out, Tim Boyle in, and the betting market is like, let's get it up to 10. Because it's got up to 10. This is
it's at 10. Okay.
It was at 10, and now it's sort of toggling back to like, where you're paying juice for plus 10. Mm-hmm. Imagine paying juice to bet on the Jets. At any number, and then you're paying some juice at minus 9.5 on the Dolphins, and I could say imagine paying juice to bet on a road team to win by 10 points. Like I don't want to do any of those things, and so the way I look at it is like, oh, okay, what's the argument for the Jets, right? Because I'm just sort of allergic to laying this amount of points on the road. I did it with the Cowboys last week. You would say, well, hey, like the Dolphins have the offense that the Cowboys do. Yeah, that's obviously the argument for the Dolphins, but like I'm looking to try to make an argument for the Jets, especially once it hit plus 10. Mm-hmm. And so the argument is like, is Tim Boyle better? Does he do something better than Zach Wilson? And like the market doesn't think so, because the market has gone from 7.5 to 9.5 to 10, like I said. So they're like, well, Zach, so he's worse. So I'm like, okay, well, if he's worse, I don't want to bet on the Jets. Like, but what I'll do is I'm going to look at the total in this game. And I know everybody would like takes a deep breath. Oh God, when Russell goes for a total here. I think under 41 is the play, because I think the good matchup in this game, the reason it's on Friday, obviously beyond the fact that Aaron Rodgers was supposed to be in this game, is like the Dolphins offense against the Jets defense. And as much as like the Dolphins offense has gotten this sort of, built this reputation of being like quote unquote unstoppable, once you look back on it and you go, okay, there's a lot of points against the Chargers. There was like the most points against the Broncos in that game. And then, like, as we talked about last week, like playing a lot of crappy teams, Giants, Panthers, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And you're just like, yeah, okay, they've built it up pretty good. But then you watch against the Raiders, and they moved the ball against the Raiders last week, but they also turned the ball over a fair amount. I don't know that they're going to turn the ball over a ton against the Jets, but I also don't think they're going to move the ball against the Jets defense in the same way. And so the Jets haven't given up more than 23 points at home all season long. So like, how many more than, the Bills, the Eagles, some of these other teams that have visited New York and played against this Jets defense? The Chargers scored more, but they had a punt return touchdown. Mm-hmm. How many more points are the Dolphins going to score here, given that they didn't really score that much against the Raiders last week and some of these other, quote unquote good teams, right? When they faced the Bills and the Chiefs, etc. It's like, okay, like let's give them 24. Let's say they score the most of any team. And then what has to happen for the Jets to kind of to cover the spread? Well, they're going to need to get to 14, 15, 16, something like that. And I'm like, oh man, I don't see that happening necessarily. But I also think there's a world in which the Jets only give up like 17 or 20 points to the Dolphins. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of capping the Dolphins at 24, maybe 27. But the number right now, the team total for the Jets is 13.5. So I think like the max, quote unquote, for the Dolphins is 27. And I don't really think the Jets can get to 13. And if the Jets do get to 13 or 17, I think that means that the offense is doing at least well enough that they're sustaining a drive or two. And so sometimes being better in this case, if for some reason this is an improvement, sometimes that doesn't mean scoring more. Sometimes that just means holding on to the ball a little bit longer, having, getting a couple extra first downs.
Not just 3 and outs.
But, but I'll defend Zach Wilson here a little bit. Like the rest of the team has, and, watch that game over from that Chargers game over just a couple of weeks ago. And tell me, like, the rest of the team is buckled up, like, especially on offense. Sure. Like, no, right? Like, so it's like, it's not like Rodgers stepping in and everybody's going to know where they're going and he's going to know where it's going. Like I said, if Tim Boyle was any good, he would already be playing. And so I think like there's a real possibility both of these teams don't get to their team total. And I only need one of those two to not get to their team total for the full game total to go under, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
so like, it could be 20-6. It could be 27-6. It could be 20-13, right? Like 21-13. Like it probably will be like 24-13, like something along those lines, where it's like, man, I don't really want to need the Jets for like a backdoor field goal cover type situation.
Yeah.
And again, like and I think the Jets defense is at least good enough to like disrupt the Dolphins in a way where like we're not going to see them score 30 on the road in, by the way, kind of a weird time slot, 3:00 on a Friday. These guys are creatures, of nature, of habit. Yeah. And it's just like, I don't know, man. I think the under is probably the play here. 41. 41's got to be the number though.
I got you. And for the people listening at home, I've changed the pick to the Miami Dolphins. I'm on the Dolphins -9.5. The reason I'm changing this pick here is because what I like to think of in these double-digit range type spreads is the quarterback I'm going against serviceable. And if I know that my guy is serviceable, I'm more likely to take the points. But if I don't know that, I don't want to be in a position where I'm sitting here trying to root for Timmy Boyle here to do something to get me the back door.
Would Tim Boyle be in the league if Aaron Rodgers wasn't in the league, like on the Jets? The answer is no.
Great question. I love how
He
that
came along with, he came along to be in the quarterback room with Aaron Rodgers, never thinking that they would need a third quarterback.
Right.
But Rodgers gets hurt, Zach Wilson's awful, and here we are.
My guy now goes from just cashing checks to having to earn those checks. Let's keep it moving to Sunday's action here. We got the Saints at the Falcons. This is a loser NFC South game for sure. I don't know what to make of either of these teams. Do I ride with the team that lost to Josh Dobbs in his second start with the brand new team? Or do I ride with the team that lost to Kyler in his second game back after coming off injury? I don't know. I think the Saints are better, but they're on the road. Sure, they play better at home. Now the Falcons are back to Ritter, and I don't care that he missed a couple games, and now they're saying, he's back, and maybe he just needed a reset. I need to see that first. I also don't want to spend that much time on this game, but give me the Saints -1.
I think, if I'm not, I think you probably get away with pick 'em here. I don't see any like definitively -1 type thing. And I only mention that because it's a Falcons game and by the Saints game, in which case like janky score, like, radars going off. Man, I'd really love I'd really love to see Jameis in this game. Like just give me some Jameis. I just want some Jameis in my life, right? Like, so we'll see. I think, it's funny. It's the type of thing where Jameis or Derek Carr, like, I don't think that changes the rating for the Saints, which at a pick'em, has them rated kind of the lowest that we've seen all season, right? Yeah. Like, I have it sort of like at -0.09 for the Falcons, right? Which is why I say to sort of knock it back down to pick'em, because I think, you can get honestly, it's pretty much dead to even pick them. And so to get to that number, because we're certainly not upgrading the Falcons. Why on earth would we upgrade the Falcons? To get to this number, you have to downgrade the Saints. And you have to downgrade the Saints like from kind of just a slightly above average team, which when we were fading the Saints against the Vikings, against the Bears the week before. Remember the Saints are 9.5 point favorites? Like people were betting that up. Those were the craziest times. It was 2 weeks ago. What a wild time. Now that we're trying to figure out like what's the bottom of the market for the Saints, and now they're facing a bad team who, speaking of bottom of the market, like this team that just came off of losing to the Cardinals. I am hard pass on like backing the Falcons as they toggle back and forth. There's certain coaches here, right, who are just like doing whatever they can to save their job. Most of them are in the NFC South, or at least half of them are in the NFC South. And it's like, Desmond Ritter, loved him the whole time. Just wanted him to get a look on the sideline, just to sort of catch up on everything. It's like, sure, man. Sure, Arthur Smith. Like, I don't believe you, right? Like it's that gif. I don't believe you.
You know how LeBron called Peyton, or not LeBron, Drake showed up to the Raptor game and called Peyton Pritchard a crypto scammer? That sounds like a crypto scammer. That sounded like a crypto scammer type line. Like, we just needed Desmond Ritter to, sit back, take a step back and see things through. But he's back now. He's good to go. He's ready.
No, listen,
you can trust me.
Arthur Smith's got that FedEx money, man. He doesn't need to get into the crypto scene. He doesn't need, he's doing this for fun. Okay, let's just get that straight, which is insane because he's so bad at it. And
it explains a lot.
Yeah, well, so like we saw this, and it was Bijan Robinson get more touches. So I'm pretty sure ownership was like, hey, what are you doing with our like prime investment of the year, right? Of last season, or of last offseason. And it still didn't really work, right? Like, it's like it worked enough to like be in a competitive game with the Cardinals. And now it's supposed to work against the Saints, and the Saints are getting priced at the lowest that we've seen essentially all season long. Now, the problem is we're backing Derek Carr and Dennis Allen on the road, and like nobody wants to do that, which is why I would at least like to see Jameis and, in the mix here. So, I like the Saints here. I know this is, you said you didn't want to talk about it a long time, and I'm not going to talk you out of it. In fact, I'm going to back you up on it. Like, it's just worth sort of mentioning here that the Saints are getting downgraded for by the way, the Saints are getting downgraded for not covering against the Bears and for losing to the Vikings. And like, you mentioned the Josh Dobbs thing. Like, Josh Dobbs might be like the 8th best quarterback in the league. Like, you're certainly in the first halves of games, right? Like, the guy's outrageous. And so it's like, that wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to a team, losing on the road in Minnesota the way that the Saints did. And, they probably could have, should have, would have even covered that number against the Bears. The Bears didn't get to the their side of the field in the second half, or at least the fourth quarter. So I just kind of look at it and go, like, if I'm being asked to lay points with the Saints, no, especially on the road, no. Pick them against a team that I think people still have these like weird, I think they can turn it around type feelings about the Falcons. Like, all right, man, like I might die on my sword going like, the Falcons are bad and I don't really care that they're at home. I know what, Desmond Ritter's up to. He's going to throw key interceptions. He's going to fumble the football. Like, I think he's more likely to do that than even if Derek Carr does it for the Saints. So, yeah, I mean, Jameis playing would be awesome, but I'm taking the Saints no matter what.
Let's go. More Sunday action. We got the Steelers as 1.5 favorites in Cincy against the Bengals. As mentioned earlier in the pod, Joe Burrow done for the year, Jake Browning in for the Bengals. And so my first question is, how bad is the Steelers offense if they're only favored by 1.5 against Jake Browning?
Well,
right? Like that's a weird, like I know that it's not just Jake Browning and I get all that. And I'm saying that as someone, if you see here, I'm on the Bengals, right?
Yeah.
But that's because I feel like the Bengals have had time to prepare and adjust and like at least come up with a game plan for Jake Browning. The Steelers offense is what it is and they're struggling, but I don't know. I'm taking the points here, the minimal points that are available here in the Bengals.
Yeah, this is the hardest game on the board for me because it's not rocket science, right? Like there's a lot to it. Sorry, just sort of checking the number. Yeah, and it has moved out to the Steelers -1.5. Okay,
hold on. I have a question for you. There's such thing as a new coach bounce. Is there such thing as a new offensive coordinator bounce?
That's the thing, right? And like, why wouldn't there be?
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't, especially when it's so blatantly obvious that like this guy's bad. And every week it's like, Dan Orlovsky or whomever, like just busting out the tape and just being like, what is this play? Like, what are we doing here? Like, this doesn't make like the one from this past week was like a Jalen Warren swing pass where there were 3 receivers to the side they were swinging it to, and none of them were blocking. Like, it wasn't a screen pass. It was just like this avalanche of like DBs coming directly at Jalen Warren as the Steelers guys were like running off in the distance. And it's just like, again, I don't know enough. Obviously, nobody knows anything about the guy who's going to replace Matt Canada, but like you'd imagine there's, it's got to be better, or it's got to be like more interesting, or like, you know what I mean? It's got to be something. And then so I look at the Bengals and I go, without Joe Burrow, and again, right back to where we started with the show, where it's like Joe Burrow from a percentage points wise, and it's why I bet on him to win the MVP once it was clear that he was ironically healthy. Mahomes, sure. What Jalen Hurts does, right. I don't think there's a team whose rating should plummet as far as the Bengals rating should plummet without Joe Burrow. Like, Joe Burrow is the reason. There are a bunch of like other sort of accessory reasons, but Joe Burrow is the reason to bet on the Bengals every week. Yeah. Like Patrick Mahomes now in this week, like that defense over in Kansas City is really, really good. Like they could get by. We've seen them get by in sort of tiny instances with, the Chad Henneys of the world. Obviously I'm not trying to downgrade Patrick Mahomes. This is more, speaking of, big ups, like this is sort of trying to pump up Joe Burrow here.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, man, like he is that dude. And we've seen it when Joe Burrow was not himself. And so is this offense, is this team going to look like Like, is Jake Browning Joe Burrow with a calf injury? Do you know what I mean?
Good. I love that. I love
right?
that.
And like part of that is like framing it from a rating standpoint, right? So like Joe Burrow with a calf injury. Remember how we were like, oh yeah, like when he was good, he was like way up here. And when he had a calf injury, we got him rated down here when they were like, 2.5 at Arizona and -3 at home to the Rams, right? Because they had just gotten smoked by teams because Joe Burrow couldn't move around. Now, Jake Browning can move around a little bit. He doesn't have a bum calf or whatever, but like, that's the question. And so the lowest that we got from a rating standpoint with the Bengals was 45 out of 100 when Joe Burrow's calf was hurt.
Yeah.
That number against a Steelers team, which is a well below average team, that would be about Cincinnati -2 in this game. So this line opened -1 for Cincinnati. And so that's obviously pretty close to -2.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so maybe the Jake Browning Bengals are 43 out of 100 from a rating standpoint. The problem is every time Joe Burrow was banged up and it was like, okay, we have to rely on kind of everybody to kind of chip in here.
Didn't work,
man. They got smoked. And they were in those individual games against Tennessee, against Cleveland, against Baltimore were like the likes of like a 25 out of 100, right? Like those blowouts were like Giantsy blowouts and Panthery blowouts, right? Like they were super, super bad. I believe T. Higgins is not available for this game. I think they put him on IR if I'm not mistaken. So I just look at this and I go, we're also going against like Steelers and like obviously the ways that they find, to win. And if this line was the way that it kind of normally would be, where it'd be like Bengals -6, -6.5, right? If Burrow hadn't got hurt, I'd probably be super into the Steelers at +6.5, and I would probably include them in like a round robin underdog money line parlay.
I gotcha.
And it's like, and so like, I know I'm supposed to be like, oh, overreaction to Burrow being hurt. Like they should be, they should at least be a pick 'em, like blah, 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 blah. But it's like, I don't know, man. I think I really like the Steelers getting a bunch of points. Now I'm giving not a bunch of points. I'm only giving like a point and a half.
Yeah.
That's kind of not enough for me to no longer, or at least to no longer like the Steelers, especially when like who I think might be the most important player relative to what happens when he's not there in the league.
Yeah. There's certain guys and certain players where I feel like their value goes beyond like just what a number could potentially show, right? Like we watched how hobbled he was early and how like limited everything else they did was. So totally with you there. And until we see Jake Browning, like, what is that?
But the thing, and again, I hate doing the whole like this guy came in as midway through the game and like he stunk. And like, so he just stinks. Like, no, I'd like to give a guy, especially with some extra time. That's the other element into this, right? Well, like, I don't know how bad Jake Browning is not. He's not Tim Boyle, right? Jake Browning went to Washington. He played in big time games. He played, I believe, he was the quarterback when they went to the college football playoff. He has been in the NFL for an extended period of time, right? Like, he can probably move the ball sort of theoretically, with an offense. The added element of the Steelers, if I was sitting there going like, well, it's Matt Canada's offense, they're terrible, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, he's no longer calling plays. I imagine everybody else, it's one of those things. And everybody sitting there listening to this probably has that same office meeting situation where you're looking around and the guy who's in charge or the guy who's making the decisions, the director of your department, and you're just like, this guy is an idiot. And like, I don't know how he got this gig. I guess he was really tight with, vice president, of marketing, Mike Tomlin. And like, that's how he got this job and has kept this job. But I imagine there's some guys in that room who would do things, quite a bit differently. Now, whether they'll be allowed to do things differently because of the director of marketing, Mike Tomlin, or vice president of, I forget, was he vice president of marketing, Mike Tomlin. Like, I don't know, right? Because how much of it is Tomlin just being like, let's run the football, Najee Harris. Meanwhile, like Jalen, what's his last name? What's the other? Oh, Jalen Warren. Jalen Warren has like the best metrics basically of any running back in the league. Like he's basically like fastest man alive, and they're just like, no, I don't want to use him that much. So like, there's just a lot to this, and it's like, what? I'm going to make a bet on this. with all these moving pieces. It's like,
It's a tough one for sure.
yeah.
No,
I
I
don't
got
really
you. I
wanna
got
do
you.
that.
The bet has been changed. The bet is on the Pittsburgh Steelers -1.5 in that one for sure. A couple more, like just, maybe not the best of the best the NFL
Thank
has
you.
to offer here, but we got the Panthers at the Titans. Titans at home as 3.5-point favorites. And I know I shouldn't be on the Titans here because 3.5 points is, more than a field goal. I get all that, but this is a fate of the Panthers. They might just be, in my mind, a next level of bad. I don't know what you have them rated as, but I
Yeah.
feel like this is a team that even a not so good Titans team can get some good vibes against. And yeah, that's where I'm at here. I'll lay the points 3.5 with the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah. So depending on how you feel about the Giants vis-a-vis Tommy DeVito, the Panthers are clearing away with the return of Kyler Murray, the return of Justin Fields. They're clearing away the worst team in the league. And the Titans here, they just came off 3 straight road games. And we talked about it last week where it was like, out of respect for Mike Vrabel, we'll take all the points that we're getting with Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
But, speaking of like verbatim quotes or whatever, like it just sort of was like, yeah, but this just really doesn't
Something's
feel
off.
good. Yeah, it doesn't really feel good. And part of that was the fact that it was like, yeah, man, they just played, 3 straight road games. You can go up and down the NFL schedules, and you're not going to find a ton of teams that have played 3 straight road games. And it's a team that's also gone to England at one point.
Yeah.
Not even in part of that in that 3-game run.
Mm-hmm.
And so the last time we saw the Titans was the last time we were excited about the Titans when they were at home. I shouldn't say the last time we saw them. The last time we saw them at home was when they beat the Falcons. They beat them handily, right? Will Levis was able to connect deep on throws. Then we still kind of were pretty excited about Will Levis when they maybe should have beat the Steelers on the road in that Thursday night game. And then the last 2 road games have not gone well at all because they can't defend the pass. Is Bryce Young going to be the guy to sort of take the baton from Trevor Lawrence and Baker Mayfield and even Kenny Pickett and be like, yeah, I'm going to be able to throw against this defense? Like, maybe, but like the problem is with Bryce Young is like, he's really good at making one really bad mistake that is headed the other direction. And every time that they're in an obvious passing situation, and at least this sort of felt this way against the Cowboys. And listen, I'm laying 10.5 points on the road with the Cowboys. I'm watching that game going like, everything I know about this, betting is that like, we're going to get up to like a 14 or 17 point lead. The Panthers are going to have one good drive, score to get under the number. And like, that's just where this game is going to end because it's just going to be like, yeah, Cowboys win by 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
And that happens. And then Bryce Young immediately throws a pick 6. And at that point, you're like, oh, I think we're up like 20 points, something along those lines. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess we're just good here. Because every time he drops back to pass, even though I'm like, I'm always kind of thinking doom, right? Every time he drops back to pass, you just watch the Cowboys offense or defensive line and just swarm over the offensive line and just sack them. And it's just like a wave of humanity because he's like, I'm back. And oh God, everybody's going to. And I think the Titans at home with their defensive line, like they can do that where, we talk about whether it's the 49ers and it's obviously kind of the same thing, but it's in the same sort of neighborhood. It's like, if your defensive line, your pass rush is good enough, you can make up for what's going on in the back end. And like, there's not a ton of teams right now where the Titans are going to be able to make up for what's going on the back end. The Panthers, I think, are one of them. And so like, again, out of respect for Mike Vrabel, et cetera, it's like, you're back home after these 3 straight losses, and you're still out there again with a rookie quarterback and all that kind of stuff. But like, I just think they can do more, and I don't know how many chances we're going to get to fade the Panthers at less, than a touchdown here, because this line really downgrades the Titans. And it's like, what am I supposed to say? Like, they shouldn't be downgraded after 3 straight losses, 2 of which were like pretty significant blowouts. Like, with that line last week, I mean, look at, from a rating perspective, the line last week where they were 7.5 point underdogs, that line, just taking that rating and applying that to this game, like the Titans should be -5 in this game. So we're obviously not bumping the Panthers up after last week. So -3.5 means that yet another downgrade on the Titans. And so like we're getting to a point where the Titans for this game, I'm gonna actually do it, live on the show here.
Yeah.
Try to, play with the numbers here. And like I got Titans to get down to this number 30, 30 out of 100. Because that's where the Panthers are at, right?
No,
like
no,
they're
no,
down
I
in
hear
like
you.
the mid to low 20s. And yeah, -3.5 is a 30 out of 100 for the Titans. Like you can have a bad pass defense that's going to get exposed by like certain teams. And like, but I don't know that means this Titans team is all of a sudden 30 out of 100. I think this is the buy low spot on the Titans in a really nice situation. And, we're going to keep our eye on it, obviously, for this game, but like, we'll see whether the Titans get like bumped way back up if they blow out the Panthers, and maybe not get too excited about it, because I think this is going to be more about the Panthers than it is the Titans. But I think we're getting a good price here on the Titans. And like, I just can't bet. If I'm betting +3.5 in the NFL, I think you have a chance to win the game.
Yeah.
And like, I can't assign that to the Panthers. I can't assign that sentence to the Panthers.
No, I totally get you. Totally got you on that for sure. We got the Bucs at the Colts. Colts at home and favored by 2.5 points. I mean, these are two teams. What were we talking a couple weeks ago? The 42 club, where I'm just kind of like, I don't know what to do
Jackie
here with these two
Robinson
teams.
style,
Right. And it's like the Colts, they can run the ball, but I feel like give me the points here with Baker and company. I mean, Baker on the road. Sure. This is just a weird game to me, but I'm going to take the points with the Bucs.
Yeah, and it's kind of like whoever's not whoever the underdog is here, if whatever points you can get them. Maybe this thing somehow, some way, for 5 seconds in our lives, and we happen to be looking at a sports book, gets itself to 3. That would be super sick. Hopefully an hour plus in, if the Lions game has not kicked off, or you have read my article about the Thursday games and you have teased this game +8.5 with the Lions back on, -1.5. So like we're kind of get this little like circle of life here going.
I like it.
Where if you aren't riding that Lions tease, or even if you are riding that at the back end of the Lions tease, if you want to front end the Lions tease, this is your back end with the Buccaneers +8.5. I don't have that. I think you summed it up perfectly, right? Where both these teams are kind of in that same neighborhood. The one thing that I'll mention that I sort of didn't really talk about in the San Francisco game is like the San Francisco rating when they got out to 13 in that game. Like I had to downgrade the Bucs just to like make it fit, because the 49ers are up to 79, and you and I, we've talked about this. Like 80 is kind of like historically good, or like going through 80 is historically good. To get to 13 against a team that the Buccaneers here, who had just won a game, who, as we said, were in, not like we had them above average, we have them in the 42, the Jackie Robinson club. I had to move the 49ers up to 13 and downgrade the Buccaneers just to like make the math work. And the 49ers managed to cover the game. So it's like, okay, cool. But like, as we talked about, right, like it was kind of dicey. So, I retrospectively, like the line was too high for the 49ers once they got to 13. They cover/pushed it anyway. So I'm not. So if I move the Buccaneers, if I said, that was just a weird outlier, let's just move the Buccaneers back to that 42, area. If I just move them right back, then we've got ourselves something like a minus, a Colts -1 type situation. So like, I do think there is a little bit of value here on the Buccaneers. I don't know why we would be getting all sorts of crazy with this Colts team. Hey, listen, they could win by a field goal. They could win by a touchdown. That's why we're going to tease it +8.5 with the Lions.
All right. Fair enough. I like that for sure. Patriots at the Giants. Patriots as road 3-point favorites. That just jumps off the page to me here. And I'm not even bringing into account the Tommy DeVito factor. Like this is in no way like, hey, I believe in Tommy DeVito. Let's roll. It's just a matter of, why are the Patriots 3-point favorites against anybody? I feel like the Giants qualify as anybody. I get it.
Right.
But like the Pats here, I would need to, how do I phrase this? At the beginning of the season, this would have been a place where I'm like, give me Belichick against this rookie QB that we'd never seen before. And Belichick will this is Pat's defense just chopping this all up. but I can't rely on that. Like my thoughts of who the Patriots are isn't who the Patriots were, part of me isn't who the Patriots are right now. So that's what's messing me up here. That's what has me with the Giants as home dogs here, +3.
Yeah, so, I talked about this sort of ceiling concept, right, with the 49ers, where, like, the rule, if you will, is if, like, you ever have to get to a point where a team busts through that ceiling, you have to fade that team, right? Like, that is an overreaction to whatever they've been doing. So let's say we had to get to the 49ers, and, because it was 13.5, and you'd put this 49ers like 81. You'd be like, okay, I have to bet, like, they're not an 81. I have to bet against them. And yes, if it means I'm, plus 13.5, then cool. And, it just was so happened that in that situation, that would have been like the last point of covering, in that game last week. Well, it's also the same, unfortunately, on the downside, right? And we talked about DeVito, where it was like, what was his rating against the Cowboys? What were the Giants' rating against the Cowboys? And it was 12, right? And it was just like, when I say the rule is like you have to bet it, but like you don't have to bet it. You can just walk away. The biggest rule is you don't have to bet a game if you don't want to bet a game. That's the golden rule.
I hope that's obvious to people.
Right? Like, I hope that's obvious. Yeah. And then it's like some things make a little bit more sense, right? Where it's like, oh, Commanders laying more than a touchdown. Like, I think we can stomach that a little bit more, right?
You told me last week. I didn't listen.
And so, oh, that's true. So the point is like, I think now with the Giants, we can do the thing where it's like the same way that the 49ers, we can never put them at 85. We're going to put the Giants at 20. We are putting them at the floor. That's the floor. Like, he's been in practice for 3 weeks. I'm talking about obviously DeVito. Like, that's the floor. And so when you say like, how is this line where that is? It's like, okay, let's make the Giants 20 out of 100. And to get the Patriots to 3-point favorites. By the way, the look ahead was like 5. The open was, I think, 4 or at least 3.5. To get this number to where it is makes the Patriots 38. Yeah, 38 out of 100. Is that too high?
I think so.
Right?
Like how? Simple question. I know it was the Commanders, but doesn't DeVito have like half the touchdowns that Mac has a whole season in like 2 games?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a bunch of like those
weird,
those related stats going around.
Not that has anything to do with what we're talking about, but I'm just saying it's just like, what are we doing here with the Patriots? Is, I guess, more so my point.
Yeah, so fundamentally though, the argument with the Giants is like, okay, they're a 20. Let's keep them at 20. Dead last in the league, as bad as you can kind of be while still like, fielding a team in a, non-pandemic situation. Which, like, if Tommy DeVito's your quarterback, like, it feels like there should be a pandemic, So like that's their number. And you go like, how does that team win? It's like, well, the other team turned it over 6 times last week. Like, okay, yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah.
Because like DeVito got sacked 9 times in that game. So it's not like, oh man, Giants offense all of a sudden cooking with Tommy DeVito. And like, it's so funny looking at the stats, like Saquon Barkley at 100 like some odd yards rushing, but he had like nothing for the first like 3 quarters of that game. And then all of a sudden was like scampering around the field. And so what if the Patriots just don't turn the ball over?
True.
You know what I mean? Like, this line kind of becomes really short. It's like all you have to do is win by 3. But here's the problem. 1, we don't know who the Patriots quarterback is going to be. And honestly, I think the vibe is that it's definitely not going to be Macaroni Jones.
That's a great name, by the way.
Right? Like, Cheesy Mac is not going to be up in this game, I don't think, because I think he has mega lost the room. So now you're going, all right, well, let's go big picture here. There's certainly no argument or no argument against Mac Jones getting the boot. So now the Patriots can do whatever they want. Will Greer can be involved. Your man's Bailey Zappi can be involved. You also look at the standings, and they are at 2 wins right now.
Yeah.
There's another team who's at 2 wins right now. It's the New York Football Giants. if you were, I don't know, positioning yourself
Valid.
to be able to replace Macaroni, this is a game you absolutely 1,000,000,000,000,000,000% have to lose if you are the Patriots. Have to.
Yeah.
Cannot win. Can't do it. Right? And so if you're literally and so it's one thing if you're the Cardinals, right? And you're like, Kyler Murray's healthy. He's running around. He's doing stuff like in practice.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh man, he's got to play. Like, we got to play him. You're like, okay, I guess we're going to play him, see how it goes. Because by the way, like if you play, Kyler Murray, you're also seeing how good he is physically and otherwise to maybe use those 2 draft picks that you have next year, even if they're not top 3, top 4, on something else. Marvin Harrison, a defensive player, an offensive lineman, et cetera, et cetera. When you're the Patriots and you feel like you can fill all the other holes, but your quarterback is so bad that like no one is complaining by you sending Mac Jones to the moon, you can then pick the worst of the 2 quarterbacks. You can pick Will Grier, even if Bailey Zappi gives you a better chance to win.
It's interesting.
Like, you know what I mean? And by the way, we're getting less money on the idea that the Patriots pick the worst, the worst quarterback. Like, how am I not supposed to bet the Giants money line? Almost like more than the +3.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
like,
I totally hear you.
What's the plus? Listen, I say, what's the +3 going to do for me? And then the Patriots win on a field goal in the dumbest like decision imaginable to like actually try and win the game. But like, isn't this so obvious that this is like one of the maybe it's one of the last acts of Bill Belichick, or maybe this is from on high, et cetera, et cetera. The line has moved, like I mentioned, the line has moved from 4 to 3.5 down to 3. If Will Grier gets announced in this game, can Will Grier be a favorite on the road? Can Bailey Zappi be a favorite on the road?
Can Mac Jones be a favorite? I'm joking.
Well, Macaroni Jones, like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, like I think we're,
I got you.
We've seen that in the past. So it's just like, the Giants are like, yo, we'll keep trying to win. Like, I'm not really sure why they're into it either. But it's just like, are we, if we're betting on the Patriots on this idea that like -3 is short because of just sort of institutional ability, like, I feel like we're missing an opportunity to at least try the Giants at +150 on the money line. Just to try, just to see, just to taste, just to see.
Macaroni versus Jersey Juice. That's a matchup I'm looking for.
Yeah, he's got the chicken parm going.
Sure. Right. What a game.
Chicken parm an option on Thanksgiving?
Should be. We got the Jags.
Never be.
We got the Jags as 2-point favorites in Houston, taking on the Texans here. I like Houston at home getting the points. It's kind of simple here. I like them in the game, period. Like, if you told me Houston just wins this game, cool, I'm in on that. And so if you're telling me I can get points, why not? It was interesting watching Houston last week, and I like their offense still, even though there was a stall late that almost ended the cover dreams for sure. But they held on. Good win. The Jags, bounce back win for the Jags. They looked really good. But overall, I'm starting to think I just like Houston, and especially Houston's offense, more than the Jags. I don't know if that's an overreaction, but give me the points.
We are this close to you just late at night one night, just skimming the internet and just being like, you know what? A CJ Stroud jersey would really add to the collection. You're just be like, you know what?
Listen,
$199 Black
maybe
Friday.
Maybe it's my guy D'Amico, man. Maybe it's my guy D'Amico. I'm still rooting for him,
Yeah, how does that work? If you get a D'Amico Ryans 49ers jersey / Texans jersey, and you know what I mean, to be just like, I've really enjoyed his post playing career.
It'd be the Texans. It'd be the D'Amico Ryans Texans golf tee. That's what I'd rock.
But like, he played for the Texans, so you could get like a D'Amico Texans jersey. But like, I think you need. Did he ever play for the 49ers? I don't think he played for the 49ers.
No.
So like, you need, you know what I mean? Like, you need some, as a 49ers fan, you need some element of to acknowledge his
For sure.
contribution as a defensive coordinator. I'm against you here, bud. I like that you're shopping because +2 is like available like in one place. But I like that because it is available. It is available.
That's just what I
moment. And I think it might be more widely available by the time people listen to this. I have Jax -1. I've been kind of waiting around. I think there's some -117 on the money line with Jacksonville. I'm going to get myself into that scene. Listen, man, like the Texans, like so very cool. Love all of it. Kind of a little disappointed last week that like if you had told me that the Cardinals were only going to score 16 out of and that was like the best that kind of Kyler could muster, I'd have been like, oh, so like Texans by a boat, right? Like that, feel 31-16 feels more like the right result than 21-16. I know handful of interceptions, right? So like that's starting to buck its head a little bit, where it's like you had the one against Cincinnati the week before, and then a couple, killer one in the end zone that I think probably would have helped them cover all the numbers that were available. Not that you should have been betting -6 when 4.5 and 5.5s were pretty widely available. So, cool little, and obviously more reason to kind of not like the Bengals, right? Where it's like, as much as, again, we love Joe Burrow, maybe the Bengals aren't really that good outside of their quarterback. So kind of a close, kind of, I don't want to say lucky, but like bit of a fingers crossed win at home against the Cardinals. Same deal against the Bucs, 2 weeks ago. Obviously, again, like I may never get over the fact that they lost to the Panthers, even though I bet on the Panthers that week. Like, I feel like that's a win that just, probably should never have existed, but we did it. And the Jags, for all of like, okay, I don't think the Jags can play with like the upper echelon teams. Obviously 49ers, Eagles, fully healthy Chiefs, like that kind of stuff.
This isn't that,
man. This isn't that. And it's, and it's not some scary home field, treacherous environment. It's a defense that's still kind of working things out with the Texans. I mean, the Texans front seven, like their front four, like I don't think that's the defense that's going to torture the Jags offensive line. Because when the Jags look bad, it's because Kansas City and Chris Jones is doing it, and the 49ers and that crew is doing it. And like if you told me Will Anderson and the Texans D line was like lighting up the Jags, I could have more of a problem with that. So there's pretty cheap money lines still available on the Jags, -117 at one prominent spot. There's plenty of -1s there, at a similar or obviously a little bit better price. So let's make sure that we get that out there. I really like the Jags this week because again, I just think they're the more polished team, and I think the number's probably fair from like a power rating standpoint. But remember, as we've talked about, the Texans, like they've been pushing that envelope on the top end of their range, right? And like we keep saying to them, like you can push through. Like maybe the push through is that win against the Bengals, but it's also like not covering by a half point against the Bucs. It's not covering some numbers by a half point. There's a lot of 5.5s out there, not covering that, right? So like they're playing like right to the edge of like their range. They just haven't pushed through. I still think they are sort of fundamentally a below average team, like just slightly below average team. And the Jags, like, they keep getting it done outside of when they play like the literal like Super Bowl contenders, the literal like apex team right now in the 49ers, who are like, whose rating is like blowing through the top of the ceiling here potentially, if we're not careful. So yeah, I like the Jags.
No, I got you. Pick has been changed to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and mostly, to be honest, for the reason of I think the Texans might be a year away from being a year away, if that makes sense.
The NFL might be 1 year away, right? Depends what they do in the draft.
Definitely.
And obviously, I don't think they have their first round pick. So, no, listen, it's not. Listen, the fact that they are pick 'em, and listen, they've already beat the Jags, so I know a lot of people sort of be into that. I figured out a long time ago that if you get a road win, doesn't mean you're winning when it gets back home, right? That other team is awake. That other team is aware of you, especially when they're sort of fending off. They're literally the only team the Jags are fending off for the division. It's a big game for the Jags. The Jags are aware of the Texans, right? So they'll be locked in.
Will they be locked in Denver as the Broncos are hosting the Browns? Broncos favored by 1. And I mean, I just laughed typing out the Browns, as I was going through it. It's like, wait, the Browns are 7-3. And it's so funny because I don't really pay attention to the standings that much. You know what I mean? In terms of,
Oh yeah, no,
how that relates to the
totally.
bets.
Yeah,
But
literally never look at it.
it was just funny to see that the Browns are 7-3. And hey, we were on the Browns last week and DTR did his thing. And that was an interesting conversation as live. We were looking at the number and the changes in terms of, Deshaun Watson being out for the season and who was going to start. And it wasn't PJ Walker and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But that leads us to this week's matchup as the Broncos are now rolling, as you talked about for a couple weeks now, and they've been able to string together some wins. Russ isn't cooking, but he's simmering.
Yeah, he's turned the elements on.
Yeah,
he's a fire hazard at some.
He's got some
it's
stuff.
Like if he took a nap, he might wake up to an alarm going off.
He's got some stuff moving, right?
Yeah, there's a marinade.
He's preheating the oven. Russ got some stuff going.
Marinade. Yeah.
And I think both defenses, as much as we talk about Russ going up against the Browns defense, I think we got to talk about DTR going against the Broncos D, which continues to play better week in and week out. For that reason, and also it being a home game, I think that changes the stakes a little here for the Browns and DTR in particular. Give me the Browns at home, Let me make sure I get that right. Give me the Broncos at home at -1.
Yeah, Ciara's asked him to take something out of the freezer, but he's forgotten because he had to do some high knees out in the backyard. So dinner can take a little bit longer potentially than expected. God, was there anything more just could see it coming a mile away obvious than the Broncos scoring that touchdown and then missing the 2-point conversion in that game on Sunday night?
Normally I get my hopes up being like, all right, now they're right. And I didn't even blink at it. I'm like, they're going to score and not get a 2-point conversion. Yes.
I couldn't have been more it took all the fun out of that last drive because I'm like, I could not be more convinced they're going to score a touchdown here. And normally a 2-point conversion is 50-50. That feels like an 11% probability.
And
right?
The play call was terrible. And it was all just so
and they take the timeout and the play and they come out of the timeout. I was like, man, Sean Payton's got to have something with this, right? A timeout. They were not even just yelling the first thing that we see on the sheet. And they come out and it's just it
was bad.
Cheesiest, lamest, most uninspiring toss to Williams where it's if you don't mind, could you run 5 yards into the end zone against they refuse to throw the ball down the field. They refuse to throw the ball into the end zone whenever they get close to the end zone. And it is infuriating. Infuriating to watch. That being said, I'm right there with you on the Broncos. And it sucks. It's so bad. It's so bad. But it's true, it's people treat the turnover thing like it has to regress. And if you just never throw the ball down the field and never put the ball in harm's way on offense, and your defense is designed and plays against a bunch of these janky quarterbacks, here comes another one. Again, love DTR, UCLA days, blah, blah, blah. If you keep playing these quarterbacks who are going to throw dumb, or you're going to take longer to throw, or going to hang on to the ball too long, or think they can get out of the pocket because they could get out of the pocket against Arizona State last year, those guys are going to get stripped or hit when they're throwing the ball. Or, by the way, they're also maybe not the most accurate guy because they weren't a starter at the start of the season.
Yeah.
And so, DTR is going to have some troubles this week. They threw that ball so many times last week against the Steelers that it was just what in the name of blank am I watching? If I just told you and you're like, oh man, I couldn't see the game. I was watching all the other games, didn't have it in my region, don't have the package, blah, blah, blah. And I was I was 13-10. I think it was 13 or 16-13. Can't remember. But I told you that was the score. You'd be like, oh yeah, probably super grimy, just handing the ball off a lot, eh? And then I'd be like, no, man, check out the box score. You would fall down when you saw how many times DTR threw the football in a game that they were never trailing in. And I'm I respect the chutzpah, right? To do it, but it's just you threw it that many times and you still only scored 13? Like, what? So I just look and I'm like, man, I think the Broncos, like the turnover regression doesn't have to happen this week. Probably happens when they play a good team down the line. Everybody will go, turnover regression. Well, it's like, you know what? Maybe Vance Joseph, who, by the way, is a veteran defensive play caller, is just really good. And when they rectified the fact that there was like 4 guys starting for them who are like basically no longer in the NFL, and they just said, you guys all need to walk either to the bench or to other teams, and they replaced them with like basically guys who are honestly doing pretty well in all phases here. Like it's not an accident Jaquan McMillan keeps getting himself in these mixes when it's like comes to footballs and interceptions and deflections and stuff like that. He's a better player than the guys that they had before. And so like the Broncos are going to get all the hype here for having the really good defense because they've been doing it since the start of the season. And by the way, some pretty decent circumstances. Ryan Tannehill, mangled leg Joe Burrow, like all these sorts of things. It's like the Broncos defense is really, really good too, but they at least have Russell Wilson, who like has a couple recipes taped up against the fridge, right? That if he gets the meat out of the marinade and gets the pierogies out of the freezer in time, like might be able to cook just enough to take advantage of some of these, short fields. By the way, there was another one, right, where like there was a short field where they brought it, interception back down to like the 9-yard line. And I immediately was like, oh, like I was disappointed. My wife, who was like sort of half asleep, was like, what happened? They score? And I was like, or like, what happened? And I'm like, well, they got an interception, but they got tackled at the 9, so they're not going to score a touchdown. Like, sure enough, they didn't. They kicked a field goal. Anyway, so like, oh yeah, glowing reports from Denver, but it's like, yeah, man, Denver to win the game outright against DTR on the road.
Let's go.
I'm into that.
Let's do it. And let's do this game as well. We got the Rams at the Cards. Cards at home favored by 1. Kyler definitely has made the Cards a little more spicy here, but we're talking about winning football games. Yep. And if you're talking to me, I like the Rams as my spicy bad team that can win games versus other not so good teams.
Right.
That's my uninformed way of talking about the rankings in a way that you are able to better articulate than I am. I'm not saying we agree on this game. That's not what I'm saying at all, because I don't know which side you're leaning, but I'm saying I'm on the Rams because I just think that the Rams, if you're asking me to win a game here, I'll trust in what the Rams got cooking with Matthew Stafford and company. I'd like to know what Cooper Kupp's saying. I'd like to have a better idea of that. And Puka's kind of banged up too. I'd like to know about that more, but yeah.
Yeah, that's the big thing, right? Like Cooper Kupp, obviously, like that matters
a lot.
Yeah.
And also I think that, at the same time too, Kyler Murray, though, it's interesting to me seeing what Kyler Murray has been able to do since he's been back, but it's still a lot of freestyling, right?
Yeah. This is like the Matt Russell Memorial Weekly. Gonna need to do some more digging, some more work.
That's allowed. Of course, that's allowed.
Especially on a week where it's like, hey, we need everything by Thursday because there's 3 games, essentially 4 games before we normally have them. Yeah, I mean, obviously this game is sort of toggled around pick'em, so it's not like, oh man, we got to get this number, because it's not like there's a 3 that it might come off of or go to or whatever, right? So like this is sort of one of those games where like you can still be thinking about it on Sunday. I just think about, like, again, we talked about it with regards to the Seahawks, and the field goal that does or does not go in late in that game or at the end of that game, Seahawks Rams last week. But also, like, what happens if Drew Lock isn't involved for an extended period, a couple of drives there?
Facts.
Right? And it's like, kind of feel like the Seahawks just like win that game pretty handily. And then you're sitting there with a Rams team at, 3-7, 3-8, something along those lines, who've just lost a game pretty convincingly at home. Cooper Kupp hobbling around. And again, if we think the Texans, by the way, if we think the Texans are good, or at least sort of, at the apex or the peak of their rating, Cardinals showing was actually pretty good. I think it's pretty good defensively. And that's always been the issue with the Cardinals, right? Because the offense, whether it was Josh Dobbs, well, I shouldn't say always, because Clayton Tune was in our lives for one brief moment. But whether it was Dobbs or whether it was Kyler Murray, like the offense at least had something to it. And we talked about this last week, where you sort of look around when Kyler Murray's out there, and you're like, Trey McBride's out there instead of Zach Ertz, and all of a sudden, like Rondale Moore is involved in making big plays. Not that he had none before, but like, sure enough, 42-yard catch or run or whatever it was against the Texans. And, Marquise Brown is in the mix. You're like, there's actually some weapons out there that when Kyler gets freestyling, he becomes a lot more interesting. And so, like if you had +6, then you're sitting here going, Cardinals have covered both games with Kyler Murray at the helm.
Yeah.
So, and again, like they're playing as if like they don't care about draft picks and et cetera, et cetera. And based on what we see from some of these quarterbacks, where it's like the number one pick last year, right? Like Bryce Young, who would you rather have right now, even with the contract in hand? Kyler Murray or Bryce Young? Mm-hmm. Now again, it's so early, and I hate doing the thing where like this guy's cooked. It's like, are we positive that the guy, whomever, whether it's, I don't think they're going to have the number one pick necessarily, but like Drake May, Caleb Williams, and then obviously there's a couple of other guys who could be, sort of good enough. Are those guys better than Kyler Murray? And it's like, I'd be way more interested in Caleb Williams. I'd be way more interested in Drake May.
Yeah.
But the idea that like they're just going to lose all these games and they're not going to be good enough to win these games, like we just kind of haven't really seen that, especially now that the defense is actually contributing and playing pretty well against, honestly, last week's opponent was a lot better than the Falcons the week before, and they held up quite nicely. So the Cardinals are definitely my lean in this scenario, but like I can't make that bet until I know whether Cooper Kupp is going to play. And if he's not going to play, I don't think it means like Cards -3 is the new number and I just missed out on a decent bet. Like how much further can it go? We're on Wednesday here, and this line has kind of crossed a little bit. As you can see, you've got it at Rams +1. I don't think that's wrong, but it was like Rams -1. Yeah. And now we've got information, or at least there's maybe potentially some information coming about Cooper Kupp, at least his practice availability on Wednesday. And that tells me that maybe it's not all that great. And, but I don't think we're going to get to like Cards -3. And if we did, by the way, I would take the Rams +3. So
I gotcha. Lots to be heard from that one as we head into kickoff for sure. We keep it going here to the Chiefs at the Raiders. Chiefs favored by 8.5 points in Las Vegas. And, even I feel like this is too many points for the Chiefs here. And it takes me a lot to say that. The Raiders, say whatever, the new coach bump or whatever has lasted a little while here, where they just seem to be they really disliked McDaniels, right? Like maybe that's a thing. Maybe O'Connell is I don't know if an upgrade over Jimmy G, but maybe they really like him more than Jimmy G. We're seeing that they are at least serviceable, right?
Yeah.
The Chiefs, the other part that we're seeing is that their receivers really can't catch. Right. And that is, guess what? A problem. No matter how good your quarterback is.
You want.
So when you're trying to cover large spreads, when you're trying to cover spreads above a touchdown, I would like to know that the receivers might be able to catch a ball that hits them in the hands. I'm trying not to be emotional about this, but 8.5 points is a lot. And I just think at home, you're the Raiders, divisional game. You can get up for this game. The blueprint is kind of out there that the Chiefs slowing them down. If you double, triple Travis Kelce, force these other guys to make plays, see what happens. You give yourself a chance. Against Mahomes, you just want a chance. A chance in 8.5 points, I'll be there. Yeah,
that was funny, eh? When the covering Travis Kelce in the end zone on that first touchdown was like covering Will Fresh Prince on the basketball court. Yes. When right during the just pass it to Will offense, that there's a topical reference, about 30 years old for people.
Pass it to Will always be a reference that
where they were literally like covering Travis Kelce's mouth and like his eyes and like doing all that stuff. Didn't work because there was a guy wide open in the back of the end zone. Okay, so let's talk about the Raiders here for a second, and the line just getting like out there last week, right? Like get close. There was 14. There was some 14 and a half with like a little bit of juice on the Raiders.
Just
Like
insane.
you didn't have to pay a crazy amount, right? So in like, when you see a point spread move like that, one team is either going up in rating or one team is going down. So like, let's look at the Dolphins, for example. And if we move the Dolphins rating up with that and to create that point spread, and you go back and you look at other games. So let's go back to that Sunday night game against I think it was a Sunday night game against Philadelphia. Not that long ago. Well, my line with the Dolphins rating of that nature is Philly minus 2.5. It's about where it was that week, right?
Okay.
Then the next week they were home to New England. The line with the current Dolphins rating and the Patriots current rating would be 11.5. Now we have seen since then the Patriots probably getting a downgrade in that.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Dolphins covered that game. So I think the rating for the Dolphins is pretty correct in that. I think if those two teams played again next week, you're probably looking at an 11.5, 12-point spread, maybe even higher than that, right? So like, kind of hard to argue that we could go higher when it comes to Miami. Then they go to Germany, and the Dolphins rating. Remember, the Dolphins took money, and that game basically closed as a pick'em, with like the Chiefs maybe being like the minus 115 side on a pick'em, like a small favorite. And the Dolphins' current rating would be Chiefs minus 0.8, right? So less than -1. So that's pretty accurate, right? So I think like at this point, like we have a pretty accurate rating for the Dolphins that has obviously kind of gotten out of whack here this week because they're playing the Jets and Tim Boyle. So like hard to kind of figure out what to make of it necessarily this week. So they take the week off and then they come back and then they get this like crazy number against the Raiders. So to get to that number, knowing that we have a pretty stable position here on the Dolphins, what did I say? 72? I don't know if even I said it, but 72 out of 100 would be that rating, and that's like a very good rating.
Hell yeah,
very good rating, highest rating that the Dolphins have had all season long. To get to 14, then what do we have to do? We got to move the Raiders rating, and so it's like, I guess I'm dropping them, even though they've won 2 games in a row here. But they have won 2 games in a row against the Giants, and they have won 2 games in a row against the Jets. So, like, you can take the Jet. I mean, we've already kicked the Giants rating into the next planet. And by the way, like, we also should be moving the Jets rating downwards as we go along here. But to get the rating for that game last week would have put the Raiders at 30 out of 100. That's really low, isn't it? For a team that has Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs and a pretty good defense, and obviously as you mentioned, the new coach, virility, if you will. So to get that down to at a 30 rating, that would make this line against Kansas City, who is like one of the more stable ratings because they've been the same rating basically, obviously outside of injury issues, basically the same rating for like 4 years. That would put the line at 10 in this game. And so this line was 9.5 for a really long time. Now, if you and I are sitting here going like, well, the Raiders are better than a 30, then 10 was never going to be the correct number.
Yeah.
So if we put the Raiders rating at like 40, still not even Jackie Robinson, right? Still not even in that crew, then the line all of a sudden comes down to about 7.5. And that's how you can see this number kind of going, right? Where the Raiders should have never been 30. They should never have been 14-point underdogs against the Dolphins last week. They should have been a little bit better than that. That's where it was when it was 9.5. People have been like, still too low on the Raiders. Let's bet them from 9.5 to 8.5. By the way, creating exposure potentially on a teaser, a 6-point teaser, getting the Chiefs underneath, right? And so when sportsbooks are willing to do that, I don't know. I kind of feel like they're like, I don't know, the Raiders could win this game and blow up all those teasers.
Yeah.
And we're fine with people just weighing in on some Chiefs minus 2.5 teasers.
Yeah.
That's just how I kind of look at it. And if this was some really terrible team, I'd think something else like, oh, that's crazy or blah, blah, blah. Hit me with those Chiefs teasers. But I'm the guy who told you the Raiders had a chance to win last week at plus 600 on the money line.
Yeah.
And damn it if it wasn't kind of interesting in that
Hell
sense,
yeah. Hell
right?
yeah, it was.
So,
Yeah.
so again, I'm with you here. I think, if I think the number is probably, 7 would be kind of insane. I understand it. 7.5 is kind of, I think, my fair number. I've made the bet at plus 9.5. I wasn't expecting it to go to 10. So that's why I grabbed the 9.5. I don't know that 9 is going to be like some key thing that's going to make or break this deal, but 8 might. And so at plus 8.5, I think the Raiders are still a play.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I totally like it. And the interesting part for me, to be honest here, as I look at it and we transition, I'm on the Raiders plus 8.5 for the record. But as we transition here to the Bills and the Eagles obviously played the Chiefs last week. And an interesting part is you talk about the line and what this reads, right? One thing I know that you were on last week was the fact that the Chiefs 2.5 point favorites,
Yeah.
and it was just left there at 2.5 points. And sometimes you wonder after we see how the game plays out, obviously, you look back and you say, oh, I guess there was a reason why that was just left at 2.5 and didn't get to Kansas City -3.
Well, you'll remember, like, it did before the pod, like a couple of days before the pod. And I said, like,
sure.
I have Eagles +3. And like, it's very interesting that it's not going back.
Exactly. Right. So as we look towards this one here, the Bills at the Eagles favored by 3.5. And I obviously hate the hook here, but the reality is I hate the Bills more versus actual good teams. And we've seen it throughout. I know the Bills, this is a weight class thing, right? I don't know if the Bills are ready for this one here. I don't know what I'm going to get from the Bills, but I feel like I know what I'm going to get from the Eagles. Or maybe the flip side is I do know what I'm going to get from the Bills against a really good team. We've seen that. They're just not ready. They're just not the team who they were billed to be, pardon the pun, at the start of the year. So Eagles -3.5. I don't like laying the hook as mentioned, but I'm going to do it here and just trusting the read on who the Buffalo Bills think they are versus who the Eagles actually are.
Yeah, this is tricky because I know I'm going to kick myself after the fact.
It's a tough one.
It's a toughie. Yeah, like, I just wish there weren't so many just trash teams in this league where we could actually, like, take information from a game and use it, But, like, what am I supposed to take from that Jets game?
Exactly.
Right? Like, nothing. So let's talk about, we've talked about the Bills rating and, like, staying ahead of the downward sort of spiral with the Bills rating, and the idea that it's like, yeah, like, we probably should be taking the Bills here because this is as low as their rating has been all season. It's the Jets. It's at home, like, blah, blah, blah. But, like, whatever. If the worst thing that happens is if we snap our 5-game, winning streak by fading the Bills here, like, that's kind of cool. So that line, as I talked about with the idea of, like, their rating falling to 58 out of 100, the line for this game with the Bills being rated as a 58 out of 100 would be Eagles by 6. So I'm supposed to, if I believe that that's a fair rating for the Bills, I'm supposed to bet the Eagles. But the Bills won handily. They didn't turn the ball over and all of that stuff. And it's easy. And as much as it's easy to say, like, the Jets suck and, of course the Bills won, blah, blah, blah. They won easily. Well, we should all be then rich because we all just bet on the Bills to cover that. Right? It's like many another team played the crappy Jets and Zach Wilson and didn't necessarily live to tell about it, or didn't necessarily get to have, the time of their lives while they were playing, right? As Robert Saleh inferred, they've embarrassed a lot of quarterbacks. So it's like, you know what, maybe that was actually a really good game for the Bills. Like, they did what they were supposed to do, right? And so it's like, yeah, even I, who don't really think that much of the Bills because they were being rated in the 70s earlier this season, like, 58's probably a little bit too low. So, like, let's kick them back up into the 60s, the low 60s, and sort of feel like 61 or 62 is a fair rating for them, especially, closer to average, closer to their average, I should say. So when you move that line, it still has the Eagles at -5. Problem is here, like, Eagles are kind of a tough spot for old Philadelphia, right? Where it's short week, coming off a really big game for them on the road. And I think a lot of people are making the case, and I don't think is necessarily wrong, that, like, you lose to the Super Bowl to a team, the next game immediately becomes more important to you than it does the other team. right?
Yeah.
And like the Chiefs look around and they look in their division, which is obviously like the number one thing that everybody in the NFL looks at, and they go, you know what? I think we're probably good. Like there's only so much trouble we can get ourselves into. Like this game doesn't mean all that much. And then you look at them losing that game and like the position, quote unquote, that it's put themselves in relative to finishing like atop the league, top the AFC, right, to get that bye. Well, their odds right now to be the first seed in the AFC, as I'm waiting for it to load. Exciting radio. They're plus 110 to get the number one seed.
Yeah.
It's not exactly dire straits at this point when it comes to the Chiefs, right? So again, the point is like the Eagles put a lot into that game. And again, when I mentioned before about the idea of like watching a game and being through 3 quarters and just looking at it and going like, how do I feel about this team that I've bet on or the team that I bet against? Do you love how the Eagles were playing through 3 quarters of that game? Like it was like Jalen Hurts is now the MVP of the league, and like before the game started, if you said, hey, whoever's going to win this game between the 2 co-favorites for MVP is going to be the favorite for MVP, I'd be like, yeah, like, duh, that makes a ton of sense. But then you watch, honestly, both of those guys, and you ask yourself, are these my league MVPs? Mm-hmm. I'm having a hard time getting there with...
Well, if Mahomes' guys could catch...
Yeah,
that might change some things.
But like the defense is better than the offense, and so it's like what quarterback wins the MVP when his defense is better than his offense, whether or not they catch this ball or that ball. But yes, if MVS catches that ball, Mahomes becomes the favorite this week, right? Or like gets ahead of Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts gets booted, plus 700, plus 800, something along those lines, because you're sitting there going like, Jalen Hurts kind of made one throw that was probably more just a really nice play by Devontae Smith to like get himself into position. Like that was a lot of DeAndre Swift. That was a lot of obviously the Eagles defense. There wasn't even a ton of running. I had Hurts over in rushing yards, and he's sitting there at 33 on 2nd and 20 million and can't get 5 more yards for me out here. And I'm just watching it going like, I don't think either of these guys, just from an eye test perspective, are my most valuable player of this season, which of course now means theoretically that award is wide open. So my point is like whether it's that game where you're like, man, I was just hoping for +3 to push, get my +2.5 up to 8.5 teaser legs home. So I'm just watching that, just hoping for that. And then I think about the Eagles game against the Cowboys, that you and I agree that the Cowboys probably win that game probably a ton of the time that it was played in the way that it was played. And I just go like, I think the Eagles they're pulling this stuff off, but they also kind of feel a little overrated to me. So even if my number is like 5, there's room for the Bills to go back up because maybe the defense is tightening up a bit. The play calling, I don't know if the play calling was even all that bad necessarily, but if the play calling is better, there's a couple more ingenuitive type plays. I don't know if that's even a word. And they're not turning the ball over. Like the Bills' efficiency numbers, like everybody, all the metrics people love the Bills' efficiency numbers. Just stop turning the ball over. I think both teams score in this game, but I'm worried. Like Dallas Goedert not being there for the Eagles, like didn't that feel kind of like a big deal? Like they weren't able to get that dump off play, that like 15-yarder out of like a good tight end that like is really important for an offense that relies to an extent on having that play available to them. And it's not a situation where they could just put Grant Calcaterra out there or Stoll or whatever, and it was, didn't miss a beat. It's like they missed a couple of beats. And Hurts is like, he doesn't look fast. And like, and they're not running plays for him. Sometimes he's taking off on because he has to. And of course they're running the tush push for the attempts always look more higher than they actually are, because you'll have 9-10 attempts in a game. But when you realize that 4 or 5 of those were tush push plays, then you're like, oh wait, he's only taking off 5 times, like from an explosiveness standpoint. So I just look at it and I go like, I think the Bills can score in this game. I think the Eagles should be able to score, but they've got a couple of pretty significant issues that take away that like that thing that I should like about them. So I like the Bills here +3.5 from a just situational circumstance deal where it's like Eagles won that game. They're a couple of games up on the Cowboys. By the way, that game is coming up. Well, no, they got San Francisco next
week. Yeah.
And then the Cowboys. Like, this doesn't feel like the game that needs to be won in the same way that these other games are games that need to be won. If I told you the Eagles went 3-1 in this 4-game stretch, which is the one that if you were if an Eagles fan, which is the one that you'd be like, oh, take that one. I don't even need it. It's this one.
Yeah, I also think too that if you're the Buffalo Bills and you're hanging on for life, like this is kind of a game that you quote unquote need to.
And
right?
that's of course the other inference, right? Where it's like you clean house, but you boot the offensive coordinator, you tighten things up at least from a turnover perspective, and you get back to maybe not where you were rated before the season, because I always thought that was a bit much, but like back to being just good. Can they be Cowboys good? I'm not asking to be 49ers good. Can they be Cowboys good? Because Cowboys good covers this number. Cowboys good potentially wins this game.
Yeah. And also too, the other part too, that's a big thing as I change the pick here to the Buffalo Bills. I think the one thing that's super important to me is the reminder of the value of that half point.
Sure.
That's something that like really, kind of tips the scales here as even I get into the next game, which that will be a valuable
quickly
thing as well.
Like imagine being down 10 and like Josh Allen needing to backdoor cover. Like when do we even get that circumstance where the Bills are underdogs, right? Like it's very easy to fade the Bills when they're giving a ton of points and you go like, well, they could win, but I don't think by that much. Yeah. Right? Which is all of these wins that we've had fading the Bills. When do we ever get them as underdogs where it's like, yeah, they could lose by 3 and we still get paid? Sick.
For sure. We're closing out here on a couple 3.5 point spread games. And the interesting part here is we're going to Sunday Night Football and we got the Ravens 3.5 point favorites in LA against the Chargers. I need help on this one because like the Chargers, I don't know what to make of them. And this is a tough spot here. I feel like, it says here I'm on the Ravens at -3.5, but the reality is that I feel like I should be on the Chargers here, right? Like it's just the bad taste in my mouth left watching them charger away another game last week in Lambeau, even though I wasn't on the Chargers last week. Do you know what I mean? Like I wasn't on them and I should be fine because, hey, that was a dub, but now you're coming back the next week and I'm still like, that team, that's who I should be riding with at home at over a field goal and the hook. I feel like that's where I should be, but I need to be talked into it. Or maybe I'm wrong. You let me know.
That isn't the name of the game, like that, right? Like understanding like like that team looked bad as they're like, as we mentioned 5 times, right? Like all the drops and all of that kind of thing. But like, it's funny, like Kansas City, they drop the ball. Kansas City, if you go, if they don't drop the ball, they win comfortably and blah, blah, blah. Chargers don't get that benefit of the doubt, right? It's never like, if they didn't drop the ball on, again, really weird circumstances, nobody's talking about them probably should have, having won that game by like double digits.
Yeah.
Right. If they win that by double digits, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more palatable to take them against the Ravens. And by the way, like the Ravens get a big win against the Bengals, but like 10-7 when Joe Burrow went out, like who knows? Who knows what would have happened, right?
Definitely.
And so like the number was always going to be, well, I shouldn't say this, like the number was 4. It was always going to be 4. And it's gotten bet down to 3.5.
Yeah.
And let's play the numbers game, right? Like we got really high on the Ravens rating. Not that anything changed necessarily from last week, but last week's rating before obviously Joe Burrow got hurt, it's about 67 on the Ravens. And so like that number came down from a point where we were getting like really frisky with the Ravens because they were pounding teams at home. But like feels like the Ravens have played like 7 straight home games, right? Like I can't even remember. I'm sure it happened like 2 weeks ago, but like I don't even remember the Ravens playing a home game necessarily, right? And so it's like, man, they've had kind of a comfy go of it recently. And so the numbers come down from 4 to 3.5, and I think that's the right direction. And so I bet the Chargers. I think I missed out on the 4. I think I just grabbed the 3.5. I don't know that they're going to win the game. Like, this is one where it's like, yeah, I think, plus 3.5. Like, I certainly think it's possible that they're going to win the game.
Yeah.
It's the Chargers, man. Like, what am I what am I supposed to believe? Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was Ravens had 3 straight home games.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're going to look good after 3 straight home games. And a game at the Cardinals before that. And a home game before that. So, like, if you're playing a stretch of 5 games, 4 of which are home and one of them are at the Cardinals, you're going to look pretty good. And it's going to be scary to bet against you. Catch some of the balls, LA. And, like, I think you're probably in the same boat you're in against the Lions, right? Like, are the Lions and Ravens that much sort of different?
No, for sure. I hear you.
Right. And, like, we didn't get 3.5 against the Lions. It got up to 3 and then came back down to 2.5. And so if you got the best of the number, you covered, or the very worst, you pushed. We talked about the game last week, but, like, I don't know the Lions. I mean, yes, obviously the Ravens pounded the Lions the one time they got to play. I think that's an interesting game if it's being played in Detroit tomorrow. But yeah, we're getting the hook with the Chargers. I think the Chargers are that play.
Speaking of the hook, I should mention the pick has been changed to the Chargers. And it's also a thing where, if you listen in the preamble, I am begging to switch that pick, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's the right. I'm like, I know this is what it should be
here, and I'll turn my back around.
I just need to be shoved off the ledge here of taking the Chargers. That's basically it. And mentioned finishing up here with some 3.5-point spreads, which brings us to Monday Night Football. You got the Vikings at home as 3.5-point favorites against the Bears. I love this Josh Dobbs story, right? What's not to like about it? But I feel like at home, 3.5 points, that's a lot. That's one where I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, that's a legit win. Now I'm asking Josh Dobbs to do some work for me here. I would need to hear that Justin Jefferson's back. I would need to hear like something like that to like encourage me more into taking the Vikings because that seems like an ask to me to win by more than a field goal as the Vikings. The Bears on the flip side, again, you mentioned it, right? They look kind of spicy with Justin Fields back. I'm not asking them to win, just asking them to keep it close against Josh Dobbs and the Vikes. Can they do that?
Yeah.
Give me the points. Bears plus 3.5.
Absolutely. The thing, I mean, you're framing it perfectly, right? We asked Josh Dobbs, or at the time we asked Jaron Hall, but eventually, Josh Dobbs by default, to stay inside of a number. They won outright. Same thing at home against the Saints. They won outright. Last week, again, comes down to a 2-point conversion that had absolutely nothing to do with Josh Dobbs. And honestly, like, I'm seeing it in my head, like, how do they not return that interception for a touchdown that got tackled on the 9-yard line? How does Jerry Jeudy not catch the ball on the previous drive, et cetera, right? None of that stuff had to do with Josh Dobbs. And so, like, the touchdowns that the Vikings got were like Josh Dobbs somehow like slimily getting away from a guy and then dumping it off to his tight end, who was inexplicably like wide open in the end zone, despite there only being about 5 yards of area where a ball could possibly be thrown. The Broncos just missed that. And then obviously that the touchdown run that Josh Dobbs does, right? But it's like, I just don't like betting against a guy or betting on a guy to like consistently pull off some crazy bleep. Like, I'd like it to be a little bit easier.
Definitely.
And obviously I'd like to not have to like ask him to win by margin against a team that, like, listen, man, like, it's not great, but it's coming along a little bit, right? Like, it's inch by inch. Like, it doesn't, Rome wasn't built in a day, and like maybe the coach has to go, but listen, if they win a few more games, maybe Eberflus is getting himself an extra year out of this whole deal. I mean, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing. Honestly, who knows, right? I can only base this stuff off of results, but it's like, I like that Justin Fields ran the ball 18 times last week, man. Yeah. I do. Okay. Yeah. That's the thing that we're looking for when that was the thing that we're looking for when like people were throwing money out of their windows to bet on Justin Fields to win MVP in the summer. Remember that? A 7.5 win Bears team, like, they're starting to look like a 7.5 win team. They might not physically get to 7.5, and to be honest with you, I hope they don't for under 7.5 purposes. But like, at least if they're playing like a 7.5 team, then they're getting pretty close to average, right? And
For
so
sure.
they got a big boost when Fields came back. That move from 10.5 to 7.5 undoubtedly was a big boost. That being said, like if that was a fair boost, this line has to be shorter than 3.5. And
Yeah.
like nothing from that game would tell me that it wasn't a fair boost. And when I say shorter, I mean like Minnesota -1. Because no, Justin Jefferson is not coming back, as my cat gets in the mix here. For those watching from an airport on YouTube. Yeah, Justin Jefferson's not coming back. Like, again, the Dobbs thing is cool. Like, I think they get 20 points. Like, that's certainly something that they're capable of doing. I think the Bears are capable. They're going to be able. Let's put it this way: Vikings love. You saw Chris Collinsworth, right? Look at all the guys they have on the line, and like the blitzing they do, and all of that kind of stuff, right? That stuff becomes a problem when you don't have mobility or you're unwilling to sort of run your quarterback and even up the odds. Because what running the quarterback does, right, is provides an extra blocker on run plays, because instead of the quarterback being like 10 yards back there watching the whole thing, he's the guy holding the ball and, running while we've got 6 or 7 blockers. He can get to the edge. You saw them talking about like even just throwing the ball to the edge. Sadly, it's what they tried to do on the Javonte Williams 2-point conversion, even though like the formation didn't make any sense, but neither here nor there. So yeah, like 3.5 is too many points here. I think this game probably comes down to a late field goal. I'm going to be on the Bears. I'm going to be on the Bears money line. Hopefully the Bears come through, and I don't know. We'll see whether I want them to ever win another game the rest of the season. But these two teams are way closer right now than a 3.5 point spread should suggest for an indoors football game. Where, by the way, Fields was awesome in Minnesota last year.
Let's go. I like that. I like that as well. Finishing strong here on a big boy ep of the pod, but lots going on. And, we're going to try to get this out Wednesday night. So hopefully it gives people even more time to listen and get this in their eardrums for sure. But in between now and whenever people happen to listen, where can they find you online, my dude?
Yeah, everything I write over at The Score on the app. You've already got the app. I know you do. You're checking scores on it. Just flip over to Bet Mode, the Bet tab. In news, all my stuff is there. NFL, college football stuff, obviously winding down. Big week here with the last regular season games of the year, conference championships next week. That's super fun. And of course, a bunch of NFL stuff. And I think we got some fun stuff cooking here as we get closer to the playoffs, which maybe I'll be able to talk a little bit about next week, but we'll see.
Sounds good, my dude. And of course, you can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at Shell Alexander and on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. Lots of stuff going on in the land of the On Blast Network. By the way, we got like Raptors post-game shows. We got like Magic fans coming at us in the Raptors post-game shows, which has been fun. We got live watch parties going on, which company wide, we could be sneaky doing some football stuff down the line, which is a story for another day, which I haven't even told you, but that's that's like backroom deals going on right now. But anyways, lots going on is the point of what I'm saying here. So stay tuned to all the accounts for that, and make sure you continue to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get this podcast as well, because we'll keep the bets coming throughout the entire season, all the way through to the Super Bowl. Can't believe it's week 12, but we are here and I love it. What a big week of football. What a time to be alive. Whew. As the kids say, do they still say that? I don't know. Either way, I used to pray for times like this, to rhyme like this. This is the Clutch Picks Sports Betting Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.